Warrior Lore. Chapter 3683. I know. You can go. When the middle-aged monk heard this, he said lightly. Then, he took out a fist-sized fruit from a bamboo basket and handed it to Chonghong. This is what this penniless monk picked up from the ground. Take it to fill your stomach first. It's still early, so bear with it if you're hungry. Thank you, master. Chonghong spoke respectfully. After receiving the fruit and bowing, he smiled at Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing before turning around and leaving. This poor monk Jiandong greets the two benefactors. Jiandong's tone began to sound like that of an ordinary monk. Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing cupped their hands casually as a greeting. Xiao Hua looked at the bamboo basket in Jiandong's hand and smiled. What is master doing? Aren't you chanting in the temple? Why are you strolling around with a bamboo basket in your hand? Fairy Jing was a bit confused. Xiao Hua had clearly asked Chonghong this question. She didn't know why he would ask again for no reason. Jiandong put his palms together and said in a low voice, Ba. If this poor monk has Buddha in his heart, then no matter when or where, his heart will worship Buddha. If this poor monk doesn't have Buddha in his heart, then even if he sits in the temple with a scroll in his hand and a wooden fish in front of him, the golden Buddha sitting in the hall of great strength would still ignore this poor monk. What you say makes sense. Xiao Hua didn't comment and said, Actually, you can send the strong men of the temple for the things in your hands. You don't have to come in person. Jiandong's expression didn't change. He gestured for Xiao Hua to follow him while answering in a low voice. Other than the golden Buddha, everything else in Chenghui Temple is idle. This poor monk is a young monk, so I came. Seeing that Jiandong's answer was very good, Xiao Hua's originally satisfied heart became even less picky. Soon after, Xiao Hua didn't ask any more questions. He only pointed at the surrounding fruit trees and melon fields and asked some questions. His tone was no different from that of a farmer in the countryside. At first, when Jiandong saw Xiao Hua asking about the temple, he felt somewhat disgusted. But then he listened to Xiao Hua's words, which were related to the livelihood of farming and mulberry trees, and had the intention of asking for guidance. He thought Xiao Hua was a young official who happened to pass by today to collect materials, so he answered with great care, not hiding anything from him. Before arriving at the gate of Chenghui Temple, Xiao Hua had already asked about the temple's affairs. As expected, the Chanyang state had given Chenghui Ridge to Chenghui Temple as a property. However, Chenghui Temple didn't encircle the ridge like the other temples. Instead, they divided the ridge into different areas and planted different things according to the soil and water. They even cultivated the land of Centipede Ridge together with the land under the ridge, regardless of whether the land belonged to Chenghui Temple or not. What was special about Centipede Ridge was that other than being used by the temple, it was also given to the surrounding villagers. Even the child beggars who had fled to this place were given to them. To put it bluntly, Chenghui Temple was like some kind-hearted rich people in the countryside. However, Chenghui Temple was different from these rich people. Chenghui Temple didn't accumulate money at all. Xiao Hua sighed slightly. The Buddhist doctrine of Buddhism was profound and taught all living things to be good. However, there was one thing that was hard for people to accept. The monks in the temple always considered themselves to be monks. They didn't produce anything themselves and only wanted people to worship them. They called it giving alms and soliciting alms. Of course, giving alms and soliciting alms were something monks should have. This showed that monks didn't have the foundation to establish themselves and could only rely on the help of people to live. However, most of the monks were eminent monks who gave alms. Most of them still had humanity. In the end, the temple had a lot of land and the monks lived a very rich life. They still had to rely on people who had difficulties to worship them. People had their own eyes, so who would believe in the temple? Who would worship monks? As time passed, the Buddhist sect began to appear hypocritical. I've learned something. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, if all the temples in the world were like Chenghui Temple, then why would there be a longevity town in the hidden immortal continent? Monk Jiandong didn't seem to know what longevity town Xiao Hua was talking about. He only smiled and said, young benefactor, I'm afraid you came from another country and aren't a citizen of my country. In my country, all the temples are like this. Really? Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and was somewhat surprised. Jiandong didn't answer Xiao Hua's words. He looked at the stairs in front of him and then looked at Fairy Jing behind him. He bowed and said, Umitba, female benefactor, my Qinghui temple doesn't allow women to set foot in. Female benefactor, please serve tea outside. Fairy Jing's eyes flashed with slight anger. How could she put this secular temple in her eyes? However, Xiao Hua's smile and warm words calmed her down. You wait here first. I'll come out immediately after I visit the temple's abbot. Xiao Hua didn't say fairy or fellow Taoist, but it sounded warm, as if there was a kind of indescribable intimacy contained within. Fairy Jing agreed in a low voice. She turned her head and walked towards the mountain plum trees in front of the mountain gate. Benefactor, please. Jian Dong raised his hand and gestured. He took the lead and walked up the stairs to the mountain gate. Xiao Hua didn't release his divine sense, but he had already seen the exterior of Qinghui Temple on the way. This was a regular temple. It looked very big, but the buildings inside were simple. There was a main hall, a meditation room, and there seemed to be a forest of pagodas behind. Moreover, these buildings didn't look very new and were somewhat old. In particular, some places had a lot of moss because of the year-round rain collection. Although the mountain gate and stairs in front of Xiao Hua were very clean and tidy, they were also somewhat shabby. They weren't even as bright as the mountain gate of Longevity Town's Shaojian Temple. Xiao Hua followed Jian Dong up the stairs and stepped through the mountain gate. What greeted him was a main hall and square. There was an incense burner in the square and incense in the main hall. However, there were sparse villagers kowtowing and offering incense. There were several young novice monks accompanying them. The incense burner didn't seem very vigorous. Chongxi. Jian Dong walked in and took a look. He called out to a young novice monk who was standing in front of the incense burner. Master. The young novice monk carefully placed the incense stick in his hand on the incense burner and hurriedly ran over. He put his palms together and bowed respectfully to Xiao Hua. Greetings, benefactor. Take this benefactor to see the abbot. Master will go to the kitchen. Jian Dong instructed the young novice monk. He then said to Xiao Hua, this poor monk will deliver tea to the benefactor. Thank you for your trouble, master. Xiao Hua nodded. Soon after, under the guidance of the little monk, Xiao Hua walked through the main hall and went all the way inside. In the end, he actually passed through the meditation room and came to a pine forest. He saw a slightly withered old monk wearing a shabby kasaya sitting on a mountain rock. He was holding a shiny prayer bead in his hand, and his mouth was slightly moving as he chanted. Martial ancestor. The young novice monk didn't dare to approach. He stood still from afar and bowed. A benefactor came to pay a visit. This disciple has brought him here. Who would have thought that the old monk didn't pay any attention to him? He only closed his eyes and slightly moved his hands. He was chanting scriptures word by word. Benefactor. The young novice monk turned his head and said apologetically, Martial ancestor is like this. If you want to wait, you can wait here for a moment. If you feel impatient, please turn back. This little monk still has some matters to attend to and can't accompany benefactor here. After he finished speaking, the young novice monk respectfully bowed and slowly walked away. Looking at his appearance, he was already used to this kind of situation. Moreover, his attitude was definitely not disrespectful. Xiao Hua didn't mind that the group of monks had left him hanging. He faintly smiled and quietly stood there, listening to the old monk chanting scriptures. The old monk's voice was extremely soft and even somewhat vague. However, Xiao Hua heard it clearly. It was the Vimalaka Sutra. The Vimalaka Sutra wasn't a scripture that ordinary monks often chanted. The things inside were rather obscure. Even Buddha's Sarira Bodhi had read it before, but he didn't understand it too well. When he heard the scriptures, Xiao Hua felt somewhat disdainful at first. However, after a moment, a trace of seriousness appeared on his face. He then slightly closed his eyes and quietly listened. The old monk's chanting voice was like a gurgling stream flowing through the pines and into Xiao Hua's ears. After a full 4 hours, the sky was already dark, but the old monk still didn't stop. Monk Jiandong also came twice. When he saw Xiao Hua quietly standing there, he didn't dare to disturb him and quietly left. Outside the temple, Fairy Jing took out a praying mat from her Qingkuan bag and sat down. She didn't cultivate and only silently recited Xiaohua's teachings. As for monk Jiandong's tea, she didn't even touch it. The sky was already dark. Naturally, the monks who were working at the foot of the mountain returned. The group of monks was very well behaved. Their footsteps weren't loud and they didn't make any noise. When they saw Fairy Jing, who still had an outstanding appearance, they didn't dare to look at her too much and carefully entered the temple. Old monk Chonghong was naturally among them. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything and followed the others into the temple. Not long after, the sound of chanting came from inside the temple. Then, the bell rang and waves of the fragrance of vegetarian food came from inside the temple. In the twilight, Jiandong came back with a basket and some food to invite Fairy Jing to eat. Fairy Jing slightly opened her eyes and looked at him. She only said 3 words, "No need." Then, she ignored Jiandong. Jiandong was helpless and could only put the basket next to Fairy Jing. Then, the young monk called Chong she stood guard at the side. This Xiaohua is a bit strange. Fairy Jing was comprehending the mysteries of Xiaohua's teachings while also being puzzled. It's just a temple. What's so good about it? Could it be that there's a hidden Buddhist expert? When she thought of a Buddhist expert, Fairy Jing's eyes suddenly opened. Xiaohua had already said that he was proficient in Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Fairy Jing had seen Xiaohua's Taoist abilities and Confucian abilities, but she had never seen Xiaohua's Buddhist abilities. Could it be that Xiaohua really met a Buddhist expert in the temple? Fairy Jing originally wanted to release her divine sense, but she hesitated. She didn't know if her divine sense would disturb Xiaohua. Forget it. So be it. Fairy Jing closed her eyes again. Sometimes, waiting is also beautiful. How long can this beauty last? -13. Chapter 3684. The night had passed, and dawn was coming. Thick clouds covered the entire Centipede Ridge, and the land fell into darkness again. Kacha. Thunder rumbled in the distance, sounding very heavy in the night. Thunder? The young novice monk, who had been sleeping soundly beside Fairy Jing, was immediately awakened by the thunder. He looked around in fright, almost forgetting that he had fallen asleep outside the temple last night. Benefactress, quickly go down the mountain and take shelter from the rain. The young novice monk naturally couldn't see how many clouds there were in the sky, but he reminded Fairy Jing based on his intuition. Fairy Jing ignored him, still sitting there without saying a word. The young novice monk didn't dare to tarry and rushed into the temple. Before long, Jiandong hurried out with several monks, each holding a bamboo pole, an oilcloth, and other things. The monks seemed very familiar with what to do and quickly set up a tent to protect Fairy Jing. Seeing the strong wind, the oilcloth was blown a bit askew, but the foundation was very solid, so there was no need to worry about it being blown away. Jiandong opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but seeing that Fairy Jing didn't say anything, he shut up. The young novice monk first stood in the tent for a while, seemingly wanting to accompany Fairy Jing. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for him to start trembling in fear. Fairy Jing gave a rare smile and said to him, "You can go back. I'm fine here." "No." Chong Shi gritted his teeth. "Benefactress is a guest of Chenghui Temple. Although I can't let you take shelter in the temple." But, while he was speaking, the rain had already started falling, smashing on the ground and the oilcloth. It was very fierce. The young novice monk shrunk his neck, not daring to say anything, and naturally leaned toward Fairy Jing. Although he was a young novice monk, Fairy Jing still wasn't used to it. She frowned slightly and blocked the young novice monk's approach. However, after a while, although it was raining heavily outside the tent, there wasn't a trace of coldness inside. Not only did the rain not fall in, but the wind also couldn't blow in. Outside the temple, there was such a heavy storm. Inside the temple, under the pine forest, it was the same. Moreover, the pine forest was like a wave amidst the strong wind. Strange sounds rang out one after another, as if there were many demons and ghosts dancing in the surroundings. Streams of rain poured down like a downpour. Clouds gushed out from Xiaohua's body, blocking everything outside his body. However, the old monk's body did not have any protection. He allowed the strong wind to blow his monk robes away, and allowed the raindrops to hit his body. Amidst the sound of wind and rain, the chanting of sutras continued. Xiaohua had the intention to investigate. His gaze fell on the old monk's body. The wind and rain fell on his body, but the old monk didn't seem to feel it at all. It was as if this was the sunlight, as if this was the air. He didn't need to pay attention to it at all. All the old monk did was to rotate the prayer beads and recite the sutra. The heavy rain wreaked havoc for more than half a day, and it only cleared up at dusk. The entire sky was bright, and an enormous rainbow streaked across the sky, leaving behind a brilliant and extraordinary splendor. Benefactor, is there something you need? The chanting old monk finally opened his mouth after reciting the last few words. His voice was a bit shaky, as if he hadn't spoken for a long time. In this world, other than the world-venerated one, where else could there be? Xiaohua indifferently replied. Oh. When the old monk heard this, he opened his eyes. His gaze was rather deep, and the wrinkles on his forehead also accumulated. Xiaohua understood. If it wasn't for the heavy rain, perhaps there would still be dust and stains between the old monk's wrinkles. This poor monk, Shunku, greets fellow immortal. The old monk did not get up. He put his palms together and said, "This one is Xiaohua." Xiaohua cupped his hands in return and said, "This one greets Zen Master Shunku. Fellow immortal, you must be an expert Confucian cultivator. I wonder what advice you have for coming to my Chenghui temple?" Shunku looked at the clouds around Xiaohua's body and asked indifferently. Xiaohua didn't hide anything and said, "On my way here, this one saw your temple's monks farming at the foot of Centipede Mountain Ridge. I also saw the peace of the villagers near Centipede Mountain Ridge. It was different from what this one had seen before. Therefore, I was curious and came to pay you a visit." "If that's the case, fellow immortal may leave," Shunku replied, treating his words like gold. Xiaohua scratched his head and thought for a while, then said, "This one wants to give some food to Chenghui Temple. Is that possible? If fellow immortal has the heart, you can go to the main hall. There's no need to look for this poor monk. Then, what if this one wants to discuss Buddhism with Zen Master?" Xiaohua asked with interest. "Oh? Since when did Confucian cultivators talk about Buddhism?" Shunku raised his eyebrows. "However," he said with a bitter expression, "however, fellow immortal is wrong. Buddhism is only in the heart. Even I, the Buddha, can only smile. If I were to preach it, would it still be a true scripture? Forget it, forget it. I won't discuss Buddhism with great monk. Which sect are you from?" Xiaohua smiled and waved his hand. In this poor monk's eyes, there is Namo Dipankara archaic Buddha in the past. In this poor monk's eyes, there is Namo Maitreya Buddha in the present. In this poor monk's eyes, there is Namo Shakyamuni Buddha in the future. How can there still be any sects in this world? Hearing this, Xiaohua's nose almost went crooked from anger. This old monk's question was not answered. It was a common method of Buddhism. However, in the end, Xiaohua still couldn't figure out this old monk's background. "Old monk, you're no fun at all," Xiaohua coldly said. "Buddhism pays particular attention to opening the door of convenience. Although this one is a Confucian cultivator, this one also understands Buddhist principles and wants to discuss with Grandmaster. You look like you're rejecting this one at the door, so how can you talk about merit? What cultivation are you talking about? Cultivation is cultivation. Merit is also merit. The two can't be mixed up." Shunku seemed to feel that he had gone too far. His tone softened. "My Buddha talks about fate. If Benefactor is fated with my Buddha, this poor monk doesn't need to say anything more. Benefactor will naturally enter my Buddhism. If Benefactor isn't fated with my Buddha, what can this poor monk do even if this poor monk is eloquent? Then why is this monk sitting as the abbot of Chenghui Temple? Why are there so many benevolent fields around Centipede Ridge? Isn't this merit to attract the villagers to Buddhism? Isn't it to let the light of Buddha shine on the single Yang kingdom? The sea of bitterness is boundless. Repent and you'll see the shore. This poor monk doesn't want any merit. The light of Buddha doesn't need eyes merit to shine on the single Yang kingdom." Shunku replied faintly, "This poor monk only knows that cultivation is life. Every action and word is cultivation. Since this poor monk can't get rid of this stinky body, this poor monk can only cultivate day and night. Xiaohua wanted to say something, but Shinku continued, benefactor. I'm afraid you have the same idea as ordinary people. As long as one cultivates, one must break away from worldly affairs. You don't know that everywhere in this world is a sea of bitterness. Even if you hide in a meditation room, it's impossible to be peaceful. Instead, why not go deep into the sea of bitterness to cultivate? Benefactor, you just mentioned merit. Saving one person is merit. Saving 10 people is also merit. It doesn't have to be saving others in times of danger to be merit. The monks of Chenghui Temple, and even the monks of other single Yang Kingdom, although they lack the time to chant sutras and meditate, they are also cultivating while working. Moreover, the monks of my single Yang Kingdom don't let the people of the world suffer and accumulate merit. Who can say that this isn't merit? Haha, old monk, you're right. Xiaohua laughed. Saving people from suffering is a small merit. Teaching people to get out of suffering is a great merit. There's no need to teach Buddhist principles. As long as you teach kindness, Buddha's light will shine. This Xiao is more and more interested in the state preceptor of the single Yang Kingdom. Goodbye. After saying that, Xiaohua cupped his hands at Shinku. Auspicious clouds appeared under his feet, and he rushed into the sky. Outside the temple, Fairy Jing saw Xiaohua come out. She also turned into a rainbow and chased after him. In a moment, the two figures disappeared. Oh? Shinku raised his eyebrows, slightly surprised. Then he closed his eyes and was about to chant sutras. But at this moment, he thought of something and said loudly, Xingzhu, which disciple brought this benefactor here? This seat has something to ask. Xiaohua flew into the sky with a smile on his face. Fairy Jing saw him and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Xiao seems to have gained a lot from this trip. Yes, indeed. Xiaohua nodded. The Buddhist sect of the single Yang Kingdom is different from what this Xiao knows. Although Chenghui Temple is the smallest temple in the single Yang Kingdom, everything it does is magnanimous. The abbot of the temple is also different from ordinary monks. He's indeed a cultivator. Hee, I've never seen fellow Taoists speak so highly of a monk. Fairy Jing agreed. It seems that Xiao Jun is indeed a wise ruler. Whether Xiao Jun is a wise ruler or not, I don't know for now. But the Buddhist disciple supporting Xiao Jun is an expert. This Xiao is very interested in this Buddhist disciple of an unknown sect. Oh? With fellow Taoist Zhao's Buddhist sect cultivation, you can't tell what sect it is? Fairy Jing pretended to be surprised. Xiaohua waved his hand and said with a smile, This Xiao is just a dabbler. My Buddhist sect cultivation is for Taoist Yuanqing to hear. How much can I know? But this Xiao also knows some secrets of the Buddhist sect. Unfortunately, this knowledge is not enough to see the origin of the Chenghui Temple's abbot. Isn't that simple? This place is only a few hundred miles away from the capital of the single Yang Kingdom. We'll arrive in a moment. Fellow Taoist Xiao only needs to visit the state preceptor. Why wouldn't he tell you? Fairy Jing said with disdain. Xiaohua shook his head slightly. Don't be anxious. This Xiao still wants to see. I'll listen to fellow Taoist's instructions. Fairy Jing nodded her head in a virtuous manner. She didn't feel any annoyance beside Xiaohua. She seemed to want this road to be further and further, or even to have no end. After flying for a while, they arrived at another place. Some monks were farming, but there were no mountains here. Instead, there were many lakes. An exquisite temple was built between the lakes and mountains. Xiaohua didn't hesitate to descend from the cloud. What Xiaohua didn't know was that not long after he landed, a Buddhist light flew out from the Chenghui Temple of the Taowu mountain range. It quickly flew over his head in the direction of the capital of the single Yang Kingdom. 2 days later, Xiaohua once again flew out of the small temple with a smile on his face. Fairy Jing simply used the auspicious cloud technique to follow behind him. When they encountered another temple, Xiaohua didn't stop but directly flew past it. It seemed that he was satisfied with what he saw in the two temples. -13. Chapter 3685. Fellow Taoist, are you not going to go down and take a look? Fairy Jing asked with a smile, clearly trying to find something to talk about. Xiaohua replied, since I already know, I naturally don't need to go down. Fellow Taoist, aren't you afraid that Xiao Jun arranged this beforehand? Fairy Jing reminded Xiao Hua. If the ruler of a country can arrange farming to such an extent, he must be a wise ruler. Xiao Hua smiled. Fairy Jing, you might not understand farming and don't understand that farming is not easy to fake. Indeed, Fairy Jing also sighed. Although I am in charge of a country, most of the country's affairs are handled by the ruler. I only deal with the provocations of Confucian cultivators and my own cultivation. Right. Speaking of which, I finally understand why Xiao Jun wants to go to Yaodai Mountain. Amen, I already know. Fairy Jing pursed her lips and smiled. Although these Buddhist disciples cultivate, not many of them cultivate Buddhist protective divine abilities. This way, it will be difficult for the Chanyang country to resist the provocations of the nearby Confucian cultivator country. That's right. Nothing in the world is perfect. Advantages always come with disadvantages. Xiao Hua sighed. The Chanyang country's state teachers' actions have made the people rich, but the country isn't strong. Since the country isn't strong, it's hard to protect the happiness of the people. Xiao Jun probably saw this and went to Yaodai Mountain after traveling thousands of miles. No matter what, he's still better than that Xiao Jian who tricked you. Fairy Jing sneered. Then, she was suddenly stunned. She looked into the distance and asked curiously, "What's wrong? So many monks. What are they doing?" Xiao Hua had already noticed and smiled. Who knows? Maybe there's a Dharma discussion somewhere and these monks are joining together? They seem to be coming for fellow Taoist Xiao. Fairy Jing blinked her eyes. Could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao defeated 2 abbots and 2 temples, and they're coming for revenge? Xiao Hua rubbed his chin and thoughtfully looked into the distance. His figure slowly slowed down. A few miles ahead of him, there were about a dozen monks sitting cross-legged in the air. Each monk was holding a wooden fish in their hands. As they knocked on the fish, they chanted sutras. They were blocking Xiao Hua's path to the Danliang kingdom. These dozen or so monks were naturally nothing. What surprised Xiao Hua was that below the dozen or so monks, in the mountain range, there were more than 100 monks sitting cross-legged. These monks didn't seem to have any Buddhist divine abilities and couldn't fly, but they also held wooden fish in their hands and chanted Buddhist scriptures like the monks in the air. I'm not familiar with Buddhist etiquette, so I don't know what this means. Could it be that it's welcoming us? Looking at the strange scene, Fairy Jing said curiously, of course, it could also be that Xiao Jun sent a message back to the Chanyang kingdom, and the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor sent someone to rely on. I'm not sure. Let's go and take a look first. Xiao Hua's tone was somewhat cold. He said while flying forward. Actually, Xiao Hua was also at a loss. If this was really Xiao Jun's message, then the previous farming matters might really have been arranged by the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor. You lot are blocking this old man's path. What do you want? Xiao Hua flew forward and scanned with his divine sense. He knew that these monks were only at the 1st or 2nd grade of origin energy. He didn't put them in his eyes at all and asked indifferently. Hearing Xiao Hua's question, a monk flew out and bowed, Umitba. Those who walk different paths cannot work together. Confucian Senior, please turn back. My Chanyang kingdom doesn't have the person Senior is looking for. Do you know who this old man is looking for? This poor monk doesn't know. The monk's expression didn't change. Although my Chanyang kingdom was founded by a Buddhist sect, the imperial preceptor doesn't care about the matters of immortals and Buddhas. He only wants the citizens of the Chanyang kingdom to live a peaceful life. Therefore, I ask Senior to return to where you came from. Can you block this old man's path? Xiao Hua sneered. Do you have the qualifications to give this old man orders? This poor monk doesn't dare. After the monk finished speaking, he returned to his original position and sat down cross-legged. He lowered his head and chanted Buddhist scriptures. Humph! Xiao Hua snorted coldly. The clouds around him surged as he charged towards the monks. His powerful aura pushed the monks away before he could get close. Although the monks weren't thrown off their feet, they still opened up a path for Xiao Hua to calmly fly through. These monks are very strange. Fairy Jing flew over and turned to look at the monks. They weren't discouraged and didn't have any anger on their faces. They adjusted their formation and slowly flew behind Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing. They were still knocking on the wooden fish and chanting Buddhist scriptures. On the ground, although the monks couldn't catch up to the monks in the sky, they were still slowly moving forward. What are these monks doing? Xiao Hua was a bit angry because when he scanned with his divine sense, there were monks blocking the sky every few dozen li. Obviously, they weren't willing to let Xiao Hua enter the capital of the Chanyang kingdom. Moreover, these monks had low cultivation. They didn't even spare Fairy Jing a glance, let alone Xiao Hua. This concubine doesn't know either. Fairy Jing smiled bitterly. It seems that the capital of the Chanyang kingdom has some unspeakable secret that they don't want fellow Taoist Xiao to see. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have gone to Qinghui Temple. I would have killed my way to the capital, Xiao Hua said regretfully. Fairy Jing comforted him instead. Fellow Taoist, don't think too much. If you went there directly, I'm afraid you would have seen everything. Now that fellow Taoist is pressuring them step by step, they're giving themselves away. If I think about it carefully, Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes. Apart from Xiao Jun and Gigi, who else knows that the two of us came to the Chanyang kingdom? If they didn't send a message or even rush back to the Chanyang kingdom, how could these Buddhist monks stop me? Fellow Taoist, you've stayed in these two temples for a while. We can't rule out the possibility that they sent a message. Fairy Jing flew slowly with Xiao Hua while thinking. Of course, it's also possible that they sent a message. Xiao Hua nodded, but I didn't reveal any Taoist abilities. I'm only dressed like a Confucian cultivator. How could these monks know that I'm Xiao? Besides, they're only the smallest temple in the Chanyang kingdom. How could they know the secrets of the Chanyang kingdom? Yes, fellow Taoist's words are reasonable. Xiao Jun must have sent a message back. Fairy Jing thought for a while. There didn't seem to be too many possibilities, so she could only agree. Also, Xiao Hua looked at the monk blocking his way and said thoughtfully, there's also the possibility that it's a misunderstanding. Let this Xiao go and ask. With that, Xiao Hua urged his cloud to fly in front of the monk. Sure enough, when the monk saw Xiao Hua flying over, he immediately flew out and said in a somewhat silly voice, we Buddhist disciples only want to accumulate merit in the Chanyang kingdom. We don't want to get involved in a battle between immortals and Buddhas. Senior, please turn back. There's nothing in front of us that Senior wants. Yes, let me ask you. What is it that I'm looking for? Who is it that I'm looking for? Xiao Hua said indifferently. Who ordered you to come here? Has Xiao Jun already returned? This poor monk doesn't know what Senior is talking about. The monk wasn't angry. He put his palms together and said, the sea of bitterness is boundless. Turn back and the shore is before it's too late. You. Xiao Hua was a bit angry and said sternly, fine. This old man will only ask you one thing. Has Xiao Jun already returned to the Chanyang kingdom? If the Xiao Jun you're talking about is the king of my Chanyang kingdom, then this poor monk can tell Senior where the king is if not in the dragon court. The monk said indifferently, however, although Senior is a Confucian expert, my Chanyang kingdom is a Buddhist country. There's Buddhist light shining in the kingdom. Senior, go. Not waiting for the monk to finish speaking, Xiao Hua sneered, opened his mouth, and a mouthful of true qi rushed out, causing the monk to tumble down and said, this old man wants to find someone. Actually, you juniors can stop me. Go. Call Xiao Jun out for this old man. Senior, please turn back. Please turn back. When a monk fell down, dozens of monks stood up. The monks behind the monk immediately knocked on the wooden fish and chanted something as though they were chanting scriptures. Each of them even used Buddhist divine arts. Xiao Hua was quite noisy when he heard it. It was like a swarm of flies were flying around his ears. Xiao Hua raised his hand and wanted to fling it out. However, after thinking about it, he didn't want to waste time with these little monks. He activated the clouds around him and rushed over again. Just like before, he flew away easily. Hee. It was rare for Fairy Jing to see Xiao Hua so impatient. She pursed her lips and chased after him. Where is Xiao Jun? Not long after, another group of monks appeared. Their cultivation had clearly increased. Xiao Hua didn't say anything and immediately shouted, hurry up and tell him to come see me. Amitabha. The unknown monk put his palms together and said, Senior, please turn back. My family's grandmaster said that the person Senior is looking for is not in the Chanyang kingdom. Senior, please don't go any further. Humph. Without waiting for the monk to finish, Xiao Hua flew over the monk's head. The monk could only lead the group of monks to chase after him. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please calm down. Fairy Jing knew that Xiao Hua was deceived by Xiao Jian and Xiao Jun again and again. She was really angry. She hurriedly whispered, "Perhaps there really is a misunderstanding." Indeed. I asked where Xiao Jun was, but they said the person I was looking for wasn't here. This person and Xiao Jun might not be the same person. Although Xiao Hua was angry, he didn't lose his head. He nodded and said, "Actually, if they weren't both surnamed Xiao, I wouldn't have bothered with them." Hee, and you say you're not angry. Fairy Jing heard Xiao Hua say I and chuckled. All right, there are more monks blocking the way. I'll ask them carefully. Xiao Hua's face was a bit red. The matter between Xiao Jun and Xiao Jian was, after all, the master of the Chanyang kingdom. Everyone knew that even an upright official couldn't resolve family matters. It was normal that Xiao Hua couldn't tell. In front of Xiao Hua was a short and shriveled old monk. He didn't look young. Xiao Hua stood in the air and cupped his hands. "Venerable, please." "Amiba, Senior, please return." The old monk didn't beat around the bush with Xiao Hua. He put his palms together and went straight to the point. Chapter 3686. Xiao Hua's body swayed in the air. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's personality was good. If it was someone else, they would have already attacked. Xiao Hua took a deep breath and asked, "I know you don't want me to go to the Chanyang kingdom because the person I'm looking for isn't there. But the problem is this person Xiao Jun? I'm only looking for Xiao Jun to ask him some questions. I don't want his life. What are you afraid of? Besides, I've already seen Xiao Jun on Yaodai Mountain. Even if I had any ill intentions, I wouldn't have attacked him there. Why must I chase him all the way to the Chanyang kingdom? Or, who do you think I'm looking for?" "Amiba, I don't know." The old monk said he didn't know anything. "Senior, please turn back." Then, Xiao Hua took another breath and asked, "Is Xiao Jun in the Chanyang kingdom?" "I don't know." The old monk answered again. "Senior, please turn back." Xiao Hua opened his mouth and a green light shot out. It instantly approached the old monk's forehead. It was a flying sword light that touched the old monk's withered skin. Unfortunately, the old monk didn't even blink. He said in a low voice, "Amiba, I know I'm not Senior's match. If Senior wants to kill me, then do as you wish. Buddha is merciful. I'll let Senior do as you wish." "You're crazy. Why would I kill someone for no reason?" Xiao Hua was so angry that he had nowhere to vent. He snorted and ignored the old monk. His figure rushed into the air and flew away. Seeing Fairy Jing chase after him, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. This Buddhist disciple is good at everything, but he's stubborn. He knows he's not my match, but he still wants to stop me. "Oh, right?" he asked but didn't answer. Even now, I don't know why they're doing this. Or maybe they don't know at all. Fairy Jing said with a smile. Things are getting more and more interesting. I feel that it's the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor who has nothing to do with Xiao Jun. That's right. The problem is that the Buddhist sect's imperial preceptor stopped me because he didn't want me to find someone. This person. I really can't think of anyone. That's right. Xiao Hua wasn't from the hidden immortal continent. He didn't know many people and didn't know many things. Although there were a lot of books about the hidden immortal continent in the space, Xiao Hua didn't have the heart to look at those things that weren't useful for cultivation after he obtained the Confucian scroll from the Copper Pillar State Academy. Therefore, he didn't even know about the mysterious yellow list, which was something that Taoist cultivators should know about. Fairy Jing hesitantly said, "Actually, this imperial teacher is trying to hide something." Humph. He's definitely trying to hide 300 taels of silver here." Xiao Hua sneered. What kind of state teacher can this kind of person be? This time, even if this Xiao doesn't dare to be interested in their so-called secrets, then I can congratulate them now. They have successfully piqued my interest. Fairy Jing, are you interested in accompanying me to take a look? Fairy Jing's words had a double meaning. You're the one with the greatest responsibility in the world, and I'm the one accompanying you. All right, Xiao Hua said with a smile. We won't waste time with these little monks. Let's go directly to the capital city. It was extremely simple for two cultivators of 4th or 5th grade essence force to break away from these monks. Fairy Jing didn't use any divine ability. The auspicious cloud under Xiao Hua's body grew several times larger. He brought Fairy Jing past the group of monks and arrived at the capital city of the Danliang state in just an hour. Naturally, when they were still very far away from the capital city, several faint Buddhist senses swept out from the capital city. However, these Buddhist senses were very indifferent. After discovering Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing, they didn't stop and immediately returned, as if they were just checking whether they had arrived or not. Xiao Hua sensed the Buddhist senses and immediately determined the cultivation of the owner of the Buddhist senses. He coldly said, You're just a little monk of 4th grade essence force. You actually dare to block this old man's path." Fairy Jing was now very familiar with Xiao Hua. She said self-deprecatingly, "AI, that's right. I'm only at 4th grade essence force. This cultivation is really too difficult." Hee. Fairy Jing will definitely be able to divide your attention in the future. Oh, you'll definitely be able to astral projection. Right now, you're just accumulating. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Astral projection. Astral projection. I'm both looking forward to it and afraid. Fairy Jing's face revealed an indescribable expression. Let's just leave it to fate. Oh, why? Xiao Hua naturally knew the difficulty of advancing to 5th grade essence force. However, he still pretended to be curious and asked. However, before Fairy Jing could answer, two figures flew out from the direction of the Danliang state's capital city. They stepped on a thin layer of Buddhist light and flew in front of Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing. They're finally out, Xiao Hua muttered. His figure stopped in midair. Fairy Jing also urged her auspicious cloud to fly a distance away. This poor monk Jingyi greets fellow immortal Xiao. The monk in front was thin and tall. He wore a shabby monk's robe. His exposed hands and arms were extremely thin. He was simply skin and bones without a trace of flesh. Looking at his head, it was also like a skeleton. There were many wrinkles that looked like they were carved by a knife. Hearing this, Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Fellow immortal Xiao, it seems like Great Master Jingyi already knows this Xiao's name. I presume you also know this Xiao's intentions?" "Humph." A monk at the side coldly snorted. He waved the shabby monk staff in his hand. "We have already let so many disciples block you. We don't want to shed all pretense of cordiality with you. Since someone wants to force us to our deaths, then don't blame this poor monk for being impolite." "Shut your mouth." Although Jingyi was angry, his tone was still indifferent. "You are a Buddhist disciple. How can you be so competitive like ordinary people? It is also fate that fellow immortal Xiao came to my Danliang state. I'm afraid this is Buddha's test for us." After speaking, Jingyi turned to Xiao Hua and said, "Fellow immortal Xiao, the person you are looking for is really not in the Danliang state. Please return." Xiao Hua smiled and asked with interest, "Let's not talk about who this Xiao is looking for. This Xiao wants to ask you. Monks don't lie. Are you speaking the truth?" Jingyi indifferently replied, "That's right. This poor monk is not lying. I will not deceive fellow immortal. Since the person this Xiao is looking for is not in the Danliang state, you can just let this Xiao come to the capital city. Why block this Xiao on the way?" Xiao Hua asked directly. "My Danliang state does not want to get involved in disputes." Jingyi replied, "If fellow immortal Xiao comes to the Danliang state, there will be chaos in the future. Therefore, this poor monk does not want fellow immortal to come." "Then the person you are talking about, who is it?" Xiao Hua stared at Jingyi and asked with a smile that was not a smile. Jingyi slightly shook his head. "Fellow immortal knows. Why do you need this poor monk to speak? I presume Great Master knows about soul-searching techniques?" Xiao Hua raised his hand and threatened. "This Xiao only needs to press this finger on Great Master's forehead. This Xiao knows what Great Master is thinking. Fellow immortal can try." Jingyi was not afraid at all. His gaze did not shrink. Xiao Hua looked at Jingyi's dirty clothes and thoughtfully asked, "Great Master Jingyi is from the Duda lineage, right? You clearly know, yet you still ask?" Jingyi could not bear it anymore and angrily said, "Who doesn't know what you are planning? Xiaohua ignored Jingyi and said again, "In fact, before I saw Great Master, I didn't think of it. Even in Chenghui Temple, that little monk Shun Ku didn't say anything. However, since he didn't say which sect he belonged to, then he should belong to the Duda's branch. Do you think this Xiao is right?" "That's right. Fellow immortals' eyes are like torches. This poor monk is indeed Ku Duda." The word Ku completely explained Duda's cultivation. Xiaohua said, although Buddhism does not advocate Ku Duda's arduous cultivation, even the revered one of the world praised his ascetic cultivation. However, this Xiao is somewhat puzzled. Duda has 13 items. How many items can Great Master hold? Since Great Master has the position of state teacher and the help of the Danliang state, how many more ascetic cultivations does Great Master have? Amitabha. The sea of bitterness is boundless. Where is not ascetic cultivation? Jingyi put her palms together and said softly, "In the past, the revered one of the world fed the eagle with his body and abandoned his body. Today, this old monk will throw his body into the secular world. What is wrong with that? The revered one of the world sacrificed his body to save a pigeon. This old monk will sacrifice his body to save hundreds of thousands of people in the Danliang state. What is wrong with that?" Xiaohua was stunned. He somewhat understood the intention of Danliang state teacher Jingyi. Jingyi treated the position of state teacher as a kind of ascetic cultivation. She treated the responsibility of state teacher as a part of the sea of bitterness. She used it to sharpen her Buddhist nature in the secular world. Ku Duda's ascetic cultivation was indeed effective. Whether it was Buddhist Dharma or Buddhist techniques, they were far superior to ordinary Buddhas. However, just as Jingyi said, Ku Duda was usually alone. His methods of accumulating merit were limited. Even if he had great magic power, he could not accumulate much. However, if he became a state teacher, the amount of merit he could accumulate was incomparable. However, Xiaohua immediately smiled bitterly. Taoist cultivators treated state teachers as glory, splendor, and wealth. They treated the power of a country as their reliance for cultivation. However, Ku Duda treated glory, splendor, and wealth as a sea of bitterness. He used his ascetic cultivation to contribute to the country. It had to be said that in the same country, Taoist cultivators and Buddhist cultivators were completely different. Xiaohua turned his head to look at Fairy Jing. Fairy Jing had a contemplative look on her face. She seemed to have some thoughts. "Forget it, forget it." Xiaohua waved his hand. Whether it is Buddhist or Taoist, whether it is ascetic cultivation or chanting sutras, it is all cultivation. I do not understand Duda's ascetic cultivation, nor do I understand the accumulation of merit. I originally wanted to take a look at the situation in the Danliang state. I wanted to see whether Xiao Jian or Xiao Jun was a wise ruler. However, Grandmaster has repeatedly stopped me. Now, I want Grandmaster to give me an explanation. Xiao Jian? Xiao Jun? Jingyi was slightly stunned. Fellow immortal, is related to the two of them by blood? No. Xiaohua waved his hand. Grandmaster, there is no need to guess blindly. Do you think Xiao Jun or Xiao Jian is better? Both of them are dung. Jingyi answered without hesitation. You and I are also dung. Only Buddha is real. When Xiaohua heard this, he almost fell from the sky. He really wanted to choke Jingyi's neck and ask if he could speak properly. -13. Chapter 3687. All right, Great Master, tell me, who do you not want me to see? This person is definitely not Xiao Jun. Xiaohua went straight to the point. No. Who is it? This person is the person that fellow immortal Xiao is looking for, but in reality, he is not the person in fellow immortal Xiao's heart. Furthermore, this old monk does not lie. That person is really not in the single Yang kingdom. Jingyi spoke in riddles again. Woo! Hearing a huge gust of wind, Jingyi and Jinko suddenly felt as if the space around them had solidified. Not only were they unable to move, even breathing became difficult. Jinko turned pale with fright. The Buddhist staff in his hand trembled and Buddhist light shone brightly. Unfortunately, before his telekinesis could reach the Buddhist staff, he saw Xiaohua suddenly stretch out his hand and grab Jingyi's neck. He said fiercely, Little monk, Can you speak properly? Who exactly is this person? Jingyi did not resist and allowed Xiaohua to grab his neck. He said with a hoarse voice, "This old monk cannot say and does not want to say. If this old monk says, I'm afraid, fellow immortal Xiao will not be able to leave the single Yang kingdom. I'm also afraid that the single Yang kingdom will no longer exist." Who? Who is so powerful? Xiaohua was shocked and asked. Sigh. A soft sigh like a spring breeze brushed past Xiaohua's spiritual will hammer. A Buddhist will that was even more indifferent than Xiaohua's Buddhist will swept over from the distant mountain. A voice that was louder than a golden bell rang in Xiaohua's ears. If you are looking for this old monk, then come over. Martial ancestor. Jingyi escaped from Xiaohua's hand and immediately knelt in midair. Tears flowed down his face. How can you show yourself? You know that this is a trap? Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva said. If I don't enter hell, who will? The voice sighed, but there was no resentment or hatred in the voice. Even though the voice was loud, Xiaohua felt comfortable listening to it. Since Buddha wants this old monk to die, how can this old monk not die? I don't know how many years it will take to get rid of this skin. Now is the time. Martial ancestor. Jinko also knelt, but as his tears flowed, he looked at Xiaohua with resentment. Damn it, he's at least in the embryo formation realm. Xiaohua was truly shocked. He never would have thought that in the hidden immortal continent, in this Danliang country, there was actually a hidden 7th grade elemental energy. Buddhist expert. I think. Xiaohua bitterly smiled. I'm afraid things are different from what Grandmaster thinks. There must be a mistake. This Xiao. Of course, Xiaohua already knew that he had made a mistake. Furthermore, from the looks of it, this misunderstanding was extremely serious. It was actually related to the life and death of this 7th-level origin power expert. Since he had already forced the other party out, how could a mere misunderstanding be resolved? Moreover, Xiaohua immediately understood why clean clothes and those ordinary monks had blocked him. Not only did they not want him to find this Buddhist expert, they also did not want him to lose his life. Fellow immortal Xiao, please. Jingyi stood up. Her expression returned to normal as she raised her hand. Fairy Jing smiled and said, Master Clean Clothes, we must have misunderstood. The master is meditating, so we won't disturb him. As she spoke, she gave Xiaohua a meaningful glance, hinting for him to flee. Xiaohua bitterly smiled. This was a 7th grade elemental energy expert. He had never encountered something like this before. Although he had made a breakthrough in his lightning evasion technique, but Xiaohua wasn't confident that he could escape. And if he escaped, not only would he leave behind Fairy Jing, he would also provoke the other party. There would be no room for negotiation. After thinking for a moment, Xiaohua smiled and said, Fairy Jing, don't be anxious. This is a Buddhist 7th grade elemental energy expert, a Buddhist senior monk. He must have benevolence in his heart. I'll explain it to him clearly. 7th grade elemental energy? Fairy Jing was also stupefied, her face instantly becoming deathly pale. However, she immediately smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious. This concubine will accompany you. Fellow Taoist? Jingyi frowned. She sized up Xiaohua but did not say anything. Jingyi impatiently said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, what are you dawdling for? Don't you want to find Grandmaster? Grandmaster agreed to meet you. Why are you still not leaving? All right, this little monk will lead the way. Although Xiaohua's heart was pounding, he still believed in his intuition. The benevolence in this old monk's words would not lie. Humph! Jingyi still sneered. He urged his Buddhist light to fly towards the distant mountain peak. Seeing the mountain peak approaching, Xiaohua looked at Jingyi beside him and said softly, Monk Jingyi violated the precepts. This mountain peak is within the single Yang nation. How is it not within the single Yang nation's territory? This mountain peak has already been donated by the single Yang nation's king, Xiao Jun, to our Buddhist sect. It is a pure land and not within the single Yang nation's territory. Hee. Xiaohua chuckled and did not ask anymore. Buddhist disciples were the most passionate. If he did not let Bodhi out, he would not be able to win against Jingyi. After flying to the side of the mountain peak, Jingyi did not dare to directly fly up. Instead, he landed on the ground and walked up the mountain path. The mountain path was rugged, narrow, and rather steep. Jingyi did not use Buddhist techniques and climbed up step by step. Xiaohua naturally did not mind. He also walked with his feet firmly on the ground. As for Fairy Jing, how could she walk? However, after walking a few steps, light clouds appeared under her feet. When they arrived at the waist of the mountain, they walked to a cave full of thorns. Jingyi knelt on the ground and kowtowed. Martial ancestor, disciples have brought 2 people here. Do you really want to see them? Come in. That voice was still faint, as if it was neither sad nor happy. Jingyi saw that they could not persuade their martial ancestor. They stood up and stood at the 2 sides of the cave. They put their palms together and said, 2 immortal friends, please. Looking at the pitch-black cave, Xiaohua did not dare to release his divine sense. He turned to look at Fairy Jing and said, Fairy Jing, wait outside. I can go in by myself. No need. Since we are here, I will also pay my respects to the Buddhist seniors. Fairy Jing's eyes were sincere as she looked at Xiaohua. She had the determination to advance and retreat together. All right. Xiaohua was helpless. He took the lead and walked into the cave. Fairy Jing did not hesitate to follow. The cave was very big and also very dark. There was no light, but it was nothing for Xiaohua and Fairy Jing. Xiaohua walked into the cave and saw that at the end of the cave was a huge wall. In front of the wall was a square stone. A tall and thin monk wearing a shabby monk robe was sitting there facing the wall. Looking at the back of the monk, Xiaohua respectfully put his palms together and bowed. Junior Xiaohua greets the Buddhist seniors. Junior Li Jing greets the senior. Fairy Jing did not dare to be negligent and also bowed. Xiaohua, are you looking for this old monk? As the monk spoke, he slowly turned around. Xiaohua stared unblinkingly at the monk as he turned around. When he saw the monk's appearance, there was a boom sound. It was as if a thunderbolt had struck his head. Xiaohua's mind was filled with an explosion. He had never seen this monk before, but he clearly remembered this monk's appearance. Although this monk's face was very thin, his appearance had changed too much. Wasn't it the appearance of the shabby golden body in the Jiangshao Temple of the Longevity Town? Wasn't it Xiaohua's disguised appearance of Si Hang? This was the fake Si Hang meeting the real Si Hang. Moreover, in a flash, Xiaohua immediately understood everything. It must be what he had said in front of the Chenghui Temple of the Centipede Territory. If all the temples in the world were like Chenghui Temple, then why would there be a longevity town in the hidden immortal continent? This attracted the attention of others, who thought that he came from the longevity town. Now that his Tao cultivation had not recovered, he only used the cultivation of a Confucian cultivator. They thought that he was a Confucian cultivator. The news was naturally sent from the Chenghui Temple to the state preceptor of the Danliang country, Jingyi. Jingyi only needed a little analysis to conclude that he knew about this monk, and came to the Danliang country to look for this monk. Jingyi definitely knew that his grandmaster was not Si Hang, not the owner of the 99 Zhang golden body in the longevity town, so he wanted to stop him. However, he could not say it clearly. He could only say that although the Si Hang Xiaohua was looking for looked exactly the same as his grandmaster, and even his grandmaster left merit in the longevity town and set up a statue, his grandmaster was not Si Hang. Jingyi did not lie to Xiaohua. Moreover, as the state preceptor, Jingyi could clearly see that the longevity town, which was hundreds of thousands of li away, was now at the peak of the storm. As long as his grandmaster appeared, he would definitely be killed by the Confucian cultivators. He naturally did not want Xiaohua to see his grandmaster. It's a misunderstanding. After thinking it through, Xiaohua hurriedly bowed again. Junior came to the Danliang country to verify whether Xiao Jian or Xiao Jun was lying. I never thought of looking for Senior. Besides, this Junior has no idea who Senior is. Hee. The monk shook his head slightly. He raised his hand and pointed at the stone wall, asking, Xiaohua, do you see what this is? Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the shadow on the stone wall that seemed to be carved by a knife. He said in surprise, Senior, is this Senior's shadow? That's right. The monk nodded faintly. This old monk has been thinking about the relationship between my skin and the Sarira for the past 1,000 years. I have been meditating in front of this stone wall. This shadow is left behind by this old monk's skin. Great Master's Dharma is powerful. Junior is truly impressed. Xiaohua was so impressed that he prostrated himself on all fours. The monk continued, since the shadow can leave behind traces, how can your eyes not reveal any flaws? Benefactor Xiao, you must recognize this old monk. AI, all right. Xiaohua knew that this monk's dharma was powerful. He might know something like mind reading, heavenly vision, and so on. He simply admitted, this Xiao has seen Senior's statue in the Longevity Town. There's nothing to hide. The Danliang country's monarch, Xiao Jun, knows. As he spoke, Xiaohua recounted the events of the past. He smiled bitterly and said, at that time, when Senior displayed his invincible might in Longevity Town, Junior had already fainted. By the time Junior woke up, Senior had already left without attaining the fruit. However, Junior heard from others and naturally knew who Senior was. -13. Chapter 3688. At this point, Xiaohua honestly admitted, moreover, this Junior also knows that the Longevity Town isn't a good place. Master Jingyi doesn't dare to let people know that Senior Si Hang is here. Therefore, this Junior didn't dare to admit it and wanted to cover it up. I was afraid that Senior would kill me to silence me. Hee. The monk laughed. So you're a Taoist cultivator. Jingyi should have thought of this long ago. This Junior also understands Confucian cultivation, so Master Jingyi misunderstood. Xiaohua hastily explained, Benefactor, don't be afraid. How could this old monk kill you to silence you? Actually, the monk sighed and said, if this old monk was Si Hang, so what if this old monk went to the Longevity Town? Unfortunately, this old monk's Buddhist name is Benevolent, not Si Hang. That Buddhist fruit isn't this old monk's, so how could this old monk go to the Longevity Town? How is this possible? Xiaohua was shocked to death. He looked at Fairy Jing, who was also shocked, and exclaimed at the same time. There was a Buddhist disciple who used this old monk's appearance to do good deeds in the Longevity Town. The benevolent Ku Tichuo sighed and said, it was misunderstood by others. Oh, this Junior understands. Xiaohua hastily said with a smile, just like today's misunderstanding, what a coincidence. Today was a misunderstanding, but the Longevity Town might not be a misunderstanding, and it can't be so coincidental, the benevolent monk said. Hearing this, Xiaohua hastily bowed and said, Senior Si Hang, as for whether it's a coincidence or a misunderstanding, this Junior doesn't know. This Junior definitely won't speak of what happened here. This Junior is a Taoist disciple. This Junior isn't interested in the disputes between immortals and Buddhas. Do we need to swear a blood oath? Fairy Jing probed. No need. The benevolent monk said kindly, this old monk has never forced anyone to swear a blood oath before. Okay, this Junior guarantees that he won't say a single word. Xiaohua solemnly vowed. Of course, Xiaohua had to make a solemn vow. He definitely wouldn't say a single word about this matter, because he was the real Si Hang, a fake Si Hang. How could he reveal the real Si Hang, a fake Si Hang? Fairy Jing was overjoyed as she said, this Junior is the same. This matter concerns Senior's life. This Junior definitely wouldn't dare. Benevolent Xiang waved his hand and said, if that's the case, you may leave now. Thank you, Senior. Fairy Jing hadn't thought of such a simple ending. She bowed, looked at Xiaohua, and prepared to leave. But Xiaohua's starry eyes flashed with a strange expression. He looked at the knife-like marks on the stone wall and said in a low voice, Senior, you said that you've been in this cave for 1,000 years, and you've always been thinking about the relationship between the skin and the Sarira. I wonder if you've learned anything? Can you tell me? Oh, Benefactor Xiao also knows about Buddhism? Si Xiang was a little surprised and asked curiously. Xiaohua had a humble expression on his face. This Junior has been curious since young. Regardless of whether it is the Taoist sect, the Confucian sect, or the Buddhist sect, I have some understanding of them. Since Senior has some insights, this Junior is also secretly delighted. I hope to hear it. All right. A smile appeared on C.I. Xiang's face as he said, Jingyi, Jinko, wait for the two of you to come in. Xiaohua and C.I. Xiang's words weren't hidden from Jingyi and Jinko. The two of them heard clearly from outside, and their faces were already red. When they heard the call, they thought it was C.I. Xiang scolding. They hurriedly came in and knelt on the ground. This disciple was careless and caused such trouble. Grandmaster, please punish me. Unexpectedly, C.I. Xiang didn't answer and instead said, My Buddha has said that the corporeal body is a skin on the outside, easily decaying. Inside, the Sarira is a spirit, immortal for 10,000 years. When Jingyi and Jinko heard this, how could they not know that C.I. Xiang was lecturing? They hurriedly sat down cross-legged and closed their eyes to listen carefully. Xiaohua hurriedly sat down after seeing this. Similar to Jingyi, he put his palms together and quietly listened to this rare comprehension. This old monk thinks that a person is a person. Everything is based on the corporeal body. The corporeal body's influence is truly important, sometimes even more powerful than the Sarira. The corporeal body is the shadow, leaving scars on stone walls. However, the Sarira has no light, leaving no traces in the mortal world. The Sarira can't leave the corporeal body, and it can't be nourished without the corporeal body. C.I. Xiang's words drifted in the cave. Those who were fated to hear it were intoxicated, while those who weren't fated to hear it were irritated. Fairy Jing sat for a moment and saw the joy on Xiaohua's face. It was even more pronounced than Jingyi and Jinko's frown. She was delighted. She knew that she didn't understand this, so she quietly flew up from the ground and landed outside the cave. She also sat down cross-legged and comprehended Xiaohua's teachings in her heart. She stood guard for the four people at the side. Time flew by, and 81 days had passed since C.I. Xiang's words. On this day, just as Fairy Jing comprehended the beauty of it, an indescribable smile appeared on her face. The magic power around her quietly surged, and layers of multicolored light began to ripple under her snow-like skin. Suddenly, she heard a thunderclap in the pitch-black cave. It was so deafening that even the deaf could hear it. However, Fairy Jing still didn't frown, because this sound was very strange. It seemed to be extremely loud, yet also extremely soft. It seemed to be in her ears, yet it also seemed to be in her heart. Fairy Jing only felt her body expand, and all of her magic power instantly dissipated. Then, before Fairy Jing could think again, she saw Buddha's light flourish in the cave. This Buddha's light was different from what Fairy Jing usually saw. Not only did it rush out of the cave, but it even rushed into the mountain. The mountain didn't seem to have anything in it, but it also came out of the mountain. In the blink of an eye, the Buddha's light spread from the middle of the mountain to the top of the mountain. It was as if the entire mountain was filled with Buddha's light. Then, bursts of Sanskrit chants came from the cave and even the entire mountain, floating in the air and in people's hearts. In the Buddha's chants and in the Buddha's light, there were tiny images of fairies that were as small as flies and images of dragons that were even weaker than mosquitoes. Not only did they dance around the cave and the mountain, but they also surged with the Buddha's light toward the capital of the Chanyang kingdom, enveloping the surroundings. Gurgle. The Buddha's light pierced through the void, and streams of sparkling and translucent silver light fell on the mountain peak. When the Buddha's light on the mountain peak came into contact with the silver light that was invisible to the naked eye, it immediately swelled and gradually formed a humanoid golden body. Fairy Jing immediately understood that this was the strange phenomenon caused by the benevolent venerable master. She wanted to get up, but in the Buddha's light, her muscles and bones were limp, and she couldn't move at all. Even her mind was drifting. Roar. The strange phenomenon lasted for an hour, and then there was a lion's roar in the cave. The Buddha's light on the mountain, as well as the Buddha's light that rippled for miles, suddenly shrank and disappeared into the cave. In front of Fairy Jing's eyes was still the ordinary cave and the inky darkness. Amitabha. As a Taoist Yuanying, Fairy Jing couldn't help but chant Buddha's name. She stood up from the ground, and the benevolent voice sounded in the cave again. Buddha has a saying that a flower is a world, and a leaf is a spring and autumn. We Buddhists are burdened by our physical bodies, and we can't be free for our entire lives. I've cultivated hard for thousands of years, but I still haven't achieved Buddhahood. I don't have any obsessions in my heart, and I'm even comforted. Senior brother Tsihong from afar almost achieved Buddhahood. Although it's senior brother Tsihong's merit, it's also my merit. I have no hope of achieving Buddhahood in this life, so I'll wait for the next life. There's always hope, and there's always an end to life. Everything in the world is arranged by the Buddha. Although I don't know why the Buddha sent Xiao Tanyue to me, I know that I can't remember any merit in my heart, and all cultivation is based on external things. Therefore, I can't not see Tanyue. Jingyi, Jinko, do you understand? There was silence in the cave, and no sound could be heard. Fairy Jing shook her head slightly, knowing that Jingyi and Jinko didn't understand Great Master C.I. Xiang's Zen theory. Xiao Tanyue. Great Master C.I. Xiang's tone was hesitant, and he probed, have you understood? There's a lamp in the world that illuminates the earth. People see the light, but don't see the lampstand. What's wrong with the lampstand? Xiao Hua's voice sounded. There's a lampstand, but there's no light. Who can see the lampstand? There's no need to have a lampstand. There's no need to have light, but there's light that illuminates the world. Ba. Excellent, excellent. Great Master C.I. Xiang chanted Buddha's name and didn't speak again. After a while, Jingyi and Jinko accompanied Xiao Hua out of the cave. Fairy Jing's gaze wavered, and the Xiao Hua in her eyes seemed to have changed greatly, but also didn't seem to have changed at all. Let's go. Xiao Hua quietly transmitted his voice. Great Master C.I. Xiang is in seclusion again. All right. Fairy Jing transmitted her voice and moved her body, slowly flying down the mountain path. Xiao Hua and the other two respectfully bowed towards the cave and carefully walked down. After leaving the mountain peak, Xiao Hua bowed and said, Great Masters, please forgive me for offending you. Jingyi's face was rather dry. Great Master C.I. Xiang's rare lecture, but he and Jinko didn't get as much as Xiao Hua. They were really disciples of Buddhism in vain. Hearing Xiao Hua's words, he hurriedly put his palms together and said, Ba, there's no need to mention this matter. It's this old monk's fault. Please, Xiao Tanyue, if you want to see if Xiao Jian or Xiao Jun is lying, just go to the capital city and you'll know. All right. Xiao Hua didn't want to go, but looking at Fairy Jing, he felt that there was only one last step left. After hesitating for a while, he agreed. However, the four of them flew into the capital city of the single Yang Kingdom and flew out in less than an hour. At this moment, Jinko was no longer there, and Jingyi was beside him. Xiao Hua had a smile on his face as he bowed and said, Great Master Jingyi, please return. The doubts in my heart have been resolved. Thank you, Great Master. As long as Xiao Tanyue doesn't have any doubts. Jingyi smiled and said, This old monk is an ascetic monk, following the ascetic path of my Buddhism. It's rare for Xiao Jun to be able to participate in the daily practice, which surprised this old monk. That's right. To be able to live in a dilapidated palace, to be able to protect Queen Gigi, and to live in a daily life that's even worse than the ordinary marquises of other kingdoms. This kind of monarch is the fortune of the single Yang Kingdom. Xiao Hua nodded and then took out a huge Chinquan bag from his sleeve and handed it to Jingyi. He said with a smile, This Xiao has disturbed your kingdom and also listened to Great Master C.I. Xiang's lecture. This is this Xiao's sincerity. Please accept it. -13. Chapter 3689. Oh. Jingyi glanced at it and didn't take it. He waved his hand and said, My Shanliang country's Bodhisattva doesn't accept charity from any benefactor. Please take it back. Xiao Hua explained, This is a gift from me to the king of Shanliang country, Xiao Jun. It's also a gift to the people of Shanliang country. It's not charity. Jingyi wanted to say more, but Xiao Hua smiled and said, Master, take a look first. Okay. Jingyi could only take it. He opened it and was moved. He put his palms together and said, Ba. Since that's the case, this old monk thanks. Just as she said that, Reverend Clean Clothes shuddered, and grief appeared on her face. She turned her head around and looked at the mountain in the distance. She said mournfully, Ba, Grandmaster, has passed away. Ah? Xiao Hua was also shocked. In his heart, he instantly understood why Great Master Ci Xiang still wanted to see him even though he had some misgivings. Why Great Master Ci Xiang still had to spend 81 days of hard work to give them an explanation. This old monk won't send you off. Jingyi bowed and said, I hope the two of you can remember your words, Master. Don't worry. This Xiao understands. Xiao Hua hurriedly replied. Fairy Jing also nodded in agreement. Jingyi didn't say anything else. He put away the Chinkuan bag and hurriedly flew to the mountain peak. Xiao Hua stood in the air and bowed deeply to the mountain peak where Master Ci Xiang was. Then, he flew away without saying a word. Fairy Jing knew that Xiao Hua was in a bad mood, so she didn't say anything. She silently followed behind. The two flew for half a day. Xiao Hua suddenly stopped and looked around. He asked curiously, Where are we flying to? How would this concubine know? This concubine is following behind you. Fairy Jing smiled and said softly, Although Master Ci Xiang left, this concubine heard him say that if he couldn't achieve karma in this life, he would be able to in the next life. Moreover, Buddhism's cultivation is different from my Taoism. They emphasize reincarnation the most. Today's death is tomorrow's life. Today's karma is tomorrow's cause. Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be too sad. And Xiao Hua nodded. He understood. He knew that he had thought of many things. Oh right, what did you give Jingyi Master? At first, he didn't want it no matter what, but in the end, he refused to let it go. Fairy Jing tried to find something to talk about. Xiao Hua smiled. He took out another Chinkuan pouch from his sleeve and tossed it to Fairy Jing. Then I'll give you one too. Oh. Fairy Jing was truly surprised. When she opened it, she unconsciously beamed with joy. So it's so much rice. Then I will kindly accept it. On behalf of the people of my country, I thank Taoist Master Xiao. That's right. If it were ordinary spiritual herbs, Fairy Jing might not lack them, and there were plenty of them in this world. But with so much rice, who could take out so much in such a short time? With so much rice at the critical moment, who knew how many lives could be saved? No wonder even the clean-clothes master was moved. Let's go. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the Pegasus and flying chariot rushed out of the space. He said, Let's return to Black Wind Ridge. This Xiao wants to see how Xiao Jian will face this Xiao. Fellow Taoist, have you forgotten? Fairy Jing didn't get on the chariot. She sweetly smiled and said, You promised me that after arriving at the Danliang country, you would follow me to a place. Yes, this Xiao remembers. But when this Xiao was discussing with Xue Ping about going to the secret area, didn't you also say so? Xiao Hua was somewhat confused. I thought you were going to that place with me. Fairy Jing rolled her eyes at Xiao Hua. Xue Ping asked for my opinion. No matter what, he is still a junior. How can this Xiao Hua not answer? Just because this Xiao Hua gave advice doesn't mean this Xiao Hua has to go. Hee. This Xiao Hua thought that the things inside moved Fairy Jing's heart. Xiao Hua giggled. Unexpectedly, Fairy Jing didn't laugh. Instead, she solemnly reminded him, Fellow Taoist Xiao, my Tao sect has many ruins on the hidden immortal continent. Those that are easy to find, or not too dangerous have all been found by fellow Taoists. The ruins that have been found today are all left behind from the ancient times. The restrictions inside are very powerful, and the methods are also unimaginable. Although fellow Taoist Zhao's strength is outstanding, if you face the restrictions left behind by the ancient Almighty, you may not be able to gain any advantage. Moreover, according to what this Xiao Hua knows, fellow Taoist Zhao's accumulation is very deep. Now is the time to comprehend and go into seclusion. This kind of dangerous matter is mostly done by people who are unable to break through bottlenecks. Fellow Taoist Xiao is not suitable. Then what about Fairy Jing? Xiao Hua giggled as he looked at Fairy Jing. Don't be so mischievous. Fairy Jing was somewhat embarrassed and angry. I'm telling the truth. My cultivation is different from others. Although I do need some ancient items, ordinary things, I can solve them myself. Seeing that Fairy Jing was angry, Xiao Hua hurriedly smiled and said, Fairy Jing, please calm down. It's not that this Xiao Hua doesn't want to listen to Fairy Jing. But since this Xiao Hua has already made a promise, he still has to keep his promise. Moreover, this Xiao Hua also faintly feels that this trip to the secret area may have some gains. This Xiao Hua still has some confidence in himself. Fairy Jing helplessly waved her hand and said, "As you wish. As for whether I will go or not, wait until you go with me to that place." That place? Where is it? Why is it so mysterious? Xiao Hua was somewhat puzzled and asked in a low voice. Hee, it's a secret for the time being. We'll talk about it when we get there. Fairy Jing giggled and jumped on the flying car. I'll show you the way. All right. Xiao Hua's heart was rarely peaceful. He nodded and urged the flying car to fly in a certain direction. After flying for more than a month, the weather also changed a lot. From autumn to cold wind, and then to hot. Seeing that yellow sand and barren mountains began to appear in the surroundings, Fairy Jing's always calm face had some slight fluctuations. During this month, Fairy Jing didn't close her eyes to cultivate. Instead, she chatted with Xiao Hua. She would tell him some stories about the sea, or some interesting things about her travels in the hidden immortal continent, or some of her experiences in the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm. Occasionally, Fairy Jing would ask him questions about her cultivation. Regarding cultivation, Xiao Hua naturally didn't hide anything from her. As for chatting, he generally just smiled and didn't say anything. He originally didn't come from the hidden immortal continent. If he spoke too much, he would naturally be exposed. As for cultivation, as soon as Buddha's relic Bodhi came out of the cave where Benevolent Master was meditating, he immediately went into seclusion. It seemed that Benevolent Master's comprehension of life and death, the corporeal body, and the relic were extremely important to Bodhi. In fact, even Xiao Hua understood that Bodhi was one of his primordial spirits. Bodhi's corporeal body was actually his relic, and his corporeal body was the corporeal body of the Buddha's relic. Benevolent Master's so-called spirit was Bodhi, and the relationship between the corporeal body and the relic was ultimately the relationship between Xiao Hua and Bodhi. If Bodhi could comprehend this point, it would most likely be extremely beneficial to him and Bodhi. As for the place in Xiao Hua's Dantian that was injured by Kong Hongwu, it had already recovered under green-robed Xiao Hua's wholehearted efforts. In particular, the 140 or so nascent souls were placed around the invisible nascent soul by green-robed Xiao Hua, according to the formation of the capital star formation. The 5 Qi righteous thunder had already returned to normal. Every time it landed on the invisible nascent soul, a trace of lightning would rush into the bodies of the 100 or so nascent souls. Although these nascent souls grimaced in pain, their bodies would gradually expand, and they also seemed to be nourished. Soul cultivator Xiao Hua naturally wasn't idle. Every 6 hours, he would come out of the mysterious dark cloud and release all kinds of vibrating green seal characters from his mouth. At an extremely rhythmic pace, the characters would land between the eyebrows of these nascent souls. The green seal characters would become green threads that lingered between the nascent soul's eyebrows and gradually merge with them. While the souls of these nascent souls were being repaired and their corporeal bodies were being tempered, they gradually fell into Xiao Hua's control. Green-robed Xiao Hua, on the other hand, felt as if he had just survived a calamity. After his Dantian's injuries were healed, he happily lay down within the 5 Qi righteous thunder to receive the lightning strikes. While enjoying himself, he narrowed his eyes and pondered on how to refine a spirit tool. Therefore, Xiao Hua's harvest during this month was also great, whether it was an experience or cultivation. Xiao Hua keenly felt the change in Fairy Jing's mood and asked in a low voice, "Are we almost there?" Fairy Jing took a rare sniff, as if she had caught a cold. She faintly glanced at Xiao Hua, then pointed at the desert in the distance and whispered, "It's in the valley over there." "Oh?" Xiao Hua was surprised. He looked at the barren land to his left, and then narrowed his eyes to look at the scorching sun above. He didn't quite understand why Fairy Jing insisted on bringing him here. After thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua released his divine sense. However, after only a moment, a strange expression appeared on his face. Xiao Hua, what's wrong?" Fairy Jing naturally noticed Xiao Hua's expression and asked in bewilderment, "There doesn't seem to be anything funny, right?" "This Xiao isn't laughing," Xiao Hua said with a smile. This caused Fairy Jing to frown and faintly say, Fellow Taoist Xiao, I know it's wrong to hide it from you, but since we're already here, can fellow Taoist also tell me a story? Of course, of course. Seeing that Fairy Jing, who hadn't called herself concubine for a long time, suddenly called herself concubine without saying I, Xiao Hua hurriedly stopped smiling and said very sincerely, this Xiao didn't see the place Fairy Jing talked about, but this Xiao saw something interesting. Fairy Jing will know about it after a while. This Xiao isn't laughing at Fairy Jing. That's good. Fairy Jing knew she was overthinking and blushed. She nodded and said, then, let's fly there? Okay. Xiao Hua pointed in a direction similar to where Fairy Jing was going. A long, long time ago, there was a girl who liked to cultivate. Fairy Jing sat on the flying carriage and said in an indifferent tone, as if she was really telling a story. However, Xiao Hua understood that this should be Fairy Jing's own experience, just like how he told Xue Xue. -13. Chapter 3690. Fairy Jing's story was naturally Fairy Jing's love story. It sounded very ordinary. The young Fairy Jing met a cultivator she fell in love with. Unfortunately, this cultivator was a Confucian cultivator and not a Taoist cultivator. In the beginning, the Confucian cultivator still insisted on his love and resisted the resistance from his family. Unfortunately, nothing in this world was perfect. After Fairy Jing told him about her bloodline, the Confucian cultivator was completely defeated. In his eyes, the human bloodline was incomparably noble and the bloodline of a Confucian family was incomparable. He couldn't accept that his lover had a demonic bloodline. Fairy Jing looked at the departing figure of the Confucian cultivator and collapsed on the ground. Her heart was incomparably gloomy. However, this decadence only lasted for a moment. When Fairy Jing got up, she was an incomparably strong Taoist cultivator. Moreover, her Tao heart was so firm that it was beyond ordinary. Xiao Hua, do you believe in love at first sight? Fairy Jing's face, which had turned pale because of the opening of her scar, was now somewhat flushed. Xiao Hua nodded. He unconsciously thought of Fairy Hong Xia and even Ju Xia. I also believe in it. Fairy Jing firmly nodded. However, she immediately became a bit disappointed. However, I also know that emotions that start easily are also easily lost. Love that doesn't sharpen together won't last long. I feel that I can't compare to the love of that female cultivator in your story. Your past life. I didn't have time to participate. As for your future, I don't dare to participate. I don't think. Facing Fairy Jing's confession, Xiao Hua bit his lips. He didn't know how to face it and didn't know how to open his mouth. Fortunately, just when Xiao Hua was feeling very awkward, whoosh, a communication talisman unexpectedly flew over, and a voice came from afar. Xiao, fellow Taoist Xiao, why are you here? Xiao Hua hastily got up and said to Fairy Jing with a smile, Fairy Jing, look, this is what this Xiao was talking about before. This Xiao laughed because he saw him. Hee. Fairy Jing felt a bit regretful. After all, she didn't hear Xiao Hua's reply. However, if he didn't reply, wouldn't she be more satisfied? Fairy Jing, who had reached the 4th grade of elemental energy, didn't know how she should face Xiao Hua's reply. When Fairy Jing raised her head, she saw a young man in scholarly robes flying over from the distance. The young man had a pleasant smile on his face. Who else could this young man be but Fu Jiwen? When Fu Jiwen saw Xiao Hua's Pegasus and flying chariot, he naturally knew that Xiao Hua was on the chariot. However, he didn't rashly release his divine sense. When he flew closer, he saw that there was also a female cultivator on the flying chariot. He swept his divine sense and involuntarily cast a spell. However, he couldn't help but be shocked. This female cultivator's cultivation was actually unfathomable. How could he not know that this female cultivator was a Tao sect senior? When Fu Jiwen flew closer, he immediately bowed and respectfully said, Junior Fu Jiwen greets senior. Get up. Fairy Jing flicked her sleeves and smiled. I hope that fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't mind. You should address him as an equal. Little friend Fu, there is no need to be so polite. Hearing Fairy Jing's words, Fu Jiwen was even more shocked. When he first met Xiao Hua, Although Xiaohua displayed his invincible might and charged into the Copper Pillar Nation's Imperial Academy alone, Xiaohua's cultivation was only around the middle of the 3rd grade. It had only been a few years. How could Fu Jiwen believe that even Fairy Jing was inferior to him? However, Fu Jiwen used a spell to probe again. Just like before, he couldn't see through Xiaohua's cultivation at all. Hee, little friend Fu, don't look. Even I can't see through fellow Taoist Zhao's cultivation. Fairy Jing naturally noticed Fu Jiwen's spell and smiled. Even an early nascent soul cultivator became his disciple. What do you think his cultivation is? Hee. Xiaohua looked at Fu Jiwen's shocked face and said self-deprecatingly, a few years ago, this Xiao took the initiative to ask someone to become his disciple. Someone even made excuses. Fu Jiwen's face suddenly turned red. Wasn't this talking about him? Xiao. Senior Xiao. Fu Jiwen didn't dare to call Xiaohua fellow Taoist anymore. He whispered, "Why is Senior here?" Hee. Xiaohua laughed. "Come up and talk. You've seen this heavenly horse before." Eowo. The heavenly horse neighed and wagged its tail intimately at Fu Jiwen, as if it understood Xiaohua's words. "Yes, sir." Fu Jiwen obediently got on the flying carriage and stood respectfully at the side. "You still remember Xiao Jian, right?" Xiaohua knew that he would never see that unrestrained scholar in front of him again, so he asked with a smile. Fu Jiwen nodded. "Junior knows." Junior's impression of him is not very good. Junior had told Senior before. "Yes." Xiaohua nodded. "This old man wants to help the princess of the Jiang country establish a country. This Xiao Jian is one of the people this old man will rely on in the future. Therefore, after this old man obtained the Imperial Master's lot at the Jade Pavilion meeting, I came to the Danliang country accompanied by Fairy Jing to investigate Xiao Jian's background. Then, what was the result?" Fu Jiwen looked at Xiaohua's face, as if he had already understood something, but he still asked, "What else could it be?" Xiaohua shook his head slightly. "This old man is very disappointed. I hope this matter will not affect Senior's wish to establish a Dao sect." Fu Jiwen glanced at Fairy Jing and said in a low voice, "Haha, it doesn't matter." Xiaohua laughed. "This old man has already dealt with it, so there shouldn't be any mistakes. On the other hand, this old man remembers that you should be from the Yu province's Pingshan country. Why? Why did you suddenly come here?" Fu Jiwen bit his lips slightly and said, "Junior, used to be from the Yu province's Pingshan country, but now and in the future, I will no longer be from the Pingshan country, nor will I be a disciple of the Fu family." "Oh? Why?" Xiaohua was surprised. "Could it be that you were expelled from the family?" "That's right." Fu Jiwen sighed deeply. "Right now, this junior is cultivating in a hut not far away." "For your wife?" Xiaohua also looked at Fairy Jing, hesitated for a moment, and asked in a low voice, "Then, why did you build a hut here?" "I won't hide it from the 2 seniors, that's right," Fu Jiwen said with a bitter smile. "Back then, I went against my father's order and swore that I would grow old with my wife, which provoked the family's anger. However, the old housekeeper always mediated, so the family didn't send down any lightning. The old housekeeper passed away last year, and this junior no longer had any protection in the family. My father gave a restriction that if I wanted to protect my wife, I would be expelled from the family, and if I wanted to stay in the family, I would have to abandon my wife." "What an infatuated man!" Fairy Jing praised. After thinking for a moment, she took out a magic treasure from her Chinkuan bag and handed it to Fu Jiwen, saying, "This is something I obtained in my early years. I'll give it to you today." "Thank you, Senior." Fu Jiwen knew that a nascent soul cultivator's magic treasure was extraordinary, so he hurriedly received it and bowed to thank her. If this item is refined by a male and female cultivator together, it will have unexpected effects, Fairy Jing said with a smile. "Yes, this junior understands," Fu Jiwen said with a bitter smile. "Unfortunately, this junior can't ask my wife to come out and thank Senior." "Oh, little friend Fu, what do you mean?" Fairy Jing was slightly taken aback. Fu Jiwen said respectfully, "Seniors, please don't be impatient. This junior should have reported this matter to Senior Xiao long ago. Seniors, please follow this junior to the hut and this junior will explain it in detail. All right. Xiao Hua patted the Pegasus and the flying carriage rushed to the place where Fu Jiwen came from. Not long after, they arrived at a tall mountain range. A small, simple house made of poplar wood was erected on a slightly shady foothill. Seniors, please. Fu Jiwen got off the flying carriage first and respectfully invited Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing inside. Xiao Hua smiled and put away the flying carriage and Pegasus. He entered the wooden house first and saw that the interior of the house was very simple. Apart from the praying mat, there were some scrolls. The scrolls were a bit messy, and it seemed that Fu Jiwen's cultivation was very difficult. Fairy Jing looked around and glanced at Xiao Hua in surprise. Because there was no trace of a second cultivator in the wooden house, Fairy Jing didn't know where the wife Fu Jiwen mentioned was. After the two sat down, Fu Jiwen took out some spirit fruits from his small cosmos pouch and respectfully handed them over. He then said with a smile, "Didn't Senior Xiao ask before? The reason why this junior built a hut here is very simple. It's because this junior first met his wife here." Hee, so that's how it is. Xiao Hua smiled and picked up the spirit fruit. He tasted it and said, "Then the memories here must be very beautiful." "It's not that beautiful," Fu Jiwen said with an embarrassed smile. The situation at that time was very strange and almost scared this junior to death. With that, Fu Jiwen carefully took out a fist-sized wooden box from his bosom. Xiao Hua saw the wooden box clearly. It was the thunder amplification wood that he gave to Fu Jiwen at the auction in Zhaixinglu that day. Xiao Hua's heart moved, and he became pensive. Sure enough, Fu Jiwen took out a wooden box made of thunder amplification wood and carefully opened it. Inside the wooden box, there was a fist-sized odd-shaped jade crystal. The jade crystal was suffused with rays of multicolored light. Lines of multicolored inscriptions flowed on the surface of the jade crystal like chains. Layers of lightning mist floated on these inscriptions. Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal? When Fairy Jing saw this item, her face showed surprise. She let out a low cry as if she had seen something terrifying. Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal? Xiao Hua frowned and carefully thought about it. It was as if he had never seen this item in the scrolls. Fairy Jing glanced at Fu Jiwen with dissatisfaction. She raised her hand to stop Xiao Hua's hand and then transmitted a few words. Sure enough, Xiao Hua's face was a bit strange. -13. Chapter 3691. On the other hand, Fu Jiwen blinked, not understanding what Fairy Jing was talking about. He then looked at Xiao Hua and Fairy Jing in surprise and awkwardly put away the wooden box in his hand. Hearing Fairy Jing's words, Xiao Hua stared into Fu Jiwen's eyes and kindly asked, "Fu Jiwen, do you know that this is a Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal?" Reporting to Senior, this junior doesn't know. Fu Jiwen honestly replied. Fairy Jing sneered, "Even if you don't know, does your family not know?" But at this point, Fairy Jing seemed to realize something and shook her head. This old one understands. As the saying goes, knowing the law and breaking the law adds 3 levels of punishment. If you don't know that this is a Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal, even if the Immortal Palace's law enforcers catch you, your punishment won't be too strict. This is your Fu family protecting you. The Immortal Palace's law enforcers? Fu Jiwen's face instantly paled. Although he didn't know what a Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal was, he knew what a law enforcer was. After a while, he said in a low voice, "My Fu family is originally a small family in the peaceful mountain country. We might not be as knowledgeable as Senior and might not know the origin of this item." Perhaps. Fairy Jing saw that Fu Jiwen didn't seem to be faking it and said thoughtfully, "Since you really don't know the origin of this item, then you didn't purposely lead the disaster to Xiao Hua. This old one misunderstood." Haha, Xiao Hua laughed. Fairy Jing is overthinking. This Xiao and Fu Jiwen can be considered friends in times of trouble. He wouldn't have any dirty thoughts. It doesn't matter whether he has it or not. Fairy Jing glanced at the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal floating in the clouds and said indifferently, "If this old one encounters this item of Heaven's Punishment, I will definitely throw it away immediately. The farther the better." "No," Fu Jiwen said resolutely. "This junior's wife is inside. This junior will never abandon her." Fairy Jing narrowed her eyes. She looked at Xiao Hua and said in a warm voice, "Actually, although fellow Taoist Xiao hasn't said anything yet, I presume fellow Taoist already has a plan in mind? This matter is Fu Jiwen's private matter. All the decisions are in his hands." Xiao Hua similarly did not hesitate as he spoke with a grin. "That's true." Fairy Jing nodded. She turned to look at Fu Jiwen and said, "Fu Jiwen, I can see that you're an infatuated person, so why don't you say a few more words? The decision is still in your hands." Fairy Jing pointed at the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal and explained, "The Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal, as the name suggests, is a punishment from the heavens. It imprisons those who break the law within 3 inches of heaven and earth. Confucian cultivators had a painted ground as a prison, and this was the case when they refused to make any progress. This punishment is one of the methods the Celestial Palace uses to punish those who break the laws of the Celestial Palace. The sinner is imprisoned in the crystal and can't cultivate, talk to others, or see others. The sinner's entire world is a 3-inch well. It's worse than being a frog in a well. Moreover, during the imprisonment, there will be divine lightning from the heavens every day to destroy their body and soul. It's said that the suffering inside is unbearable for ordinary people." "I see. This junior understands." Fu Jiwen's eyes were filled with tenderness. He was very grateful for Fairy Jing's explanation. Fairy Jing continued, "Above the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal is the law chain of the Celestial Palace. Without the jade seal of the Celestial Palace, it can't be unlocked. Only at the end of the punishment will the law chain be unlocked. Anyone who dares to try to break it will be seen as going against the Celestial Palace and violating the laws of the heavens. If the punishment is light, the Celestial Palace will send celestial soldiers to encircle them. If the punishment is heavy, the Celestial Palace will send law enforcers to the lower realm to kill them." At this point, Fairy Jing paused again and looked deeply at Fu Jiwen. She said warmly, "Fu Jiwen, you are infatuated with your wife, but she clearly lied to you. She is using you." Yes, since Fu Jiwen still didn't know this was the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal, it meant that the sinner inside the crystal didn't tell Fu Jiwen the truth. The Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal was such an important punishment that even Fairy Jing knew about it. How could the sinner not know? If she didn't tell Fu Jiwen, wouldn't she be pulling Fu Jiwen into this whirlpool? Who would have thought that when Fu Jiwen heard this, his eyes would be filled with deep emotions? He bowed respectfully and said, "Senior, thank you for your concern for me. Things are not as you think. My wife did not deceive me. She even asked me to throw away the Heavenly Punishment Prison Crystal, but I really couldn't bear to do so. It was all my own doing." Oh? Fairy Jing was a bit confused. She also knew that this matter was a bit strange. According to what she knew, the sinner inside the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal couldn't communicate with the outside world. The sinner didn't even know where they were. Even if they fell into an abyss, even if they encountered a landslide and the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal was buried underground, the sinner inside wouldn't be able to escape. She didn't know how Fu Jiwen contacted the sinner inside and even called her his wife. That's strange. Tell me about it. However, Fairy Jing suddenly realized something and hurriedly waved her hand. Wait, it's better not to talk about this. Fairy Jing said to Xiao Hua, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, this matter involves the law of the Celestial Palace. It's not something that Taoist cultivators like us can come into contact with. Even a first-rate scholarly cultivator clan would probably avoid it if they were to encounter it." Hee. How could Xiao Hua, who had even killed the Hall Master of Star-Lord Hall, be afraid of this? Especially Fu Jiwen, who he admired a lot. Xiao Hua smiled faintly and said, "Fairy Jing, don't be afraid. Let's listen first. I'm very curious. What kind of law did the woman who made Fu Jiwen fall in love with her commit?" All right. Fairy Jing knew that she couldn't persuade Xiao Hua, so she could only nod. Fu Jiwen carefully put the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal into the wooden box. Looking at the time, he hid it close to his body again. He stood there and explained the whole matter in detail. It was really a sad but beautiful story. As early as a few years ago, Fu Jiwen traveled to this place. Seeing that the time was late, he rested at the foot of the mountain. When night fell, the stone wall behind Fu Jiwen suddenly shone with extraordinary splendor. Then, a beautiful woman flew out from the mountain rock. Fu Jiwen was dumbfounded, and a strange ripple appeared in his heart. The woman was also very happy to see Fu Jiwen, and she immediately had a long talk with Fu Jiwen. The woman's name was Worry Cloud, and she was a mountain spirit. However, the woman was very knowledgeable and witty. Fu Jiwen only chatted with her for an hour, and he immediately regarded her as a celestial being. What made Fu Jiwen overjoyed was that the woman also had a special liking for him. Under the clear moonlight, the two of them were in love, and the heaven became the quilt and the earth became the bed. What was even more unexpected to Fu Jiwen was that after the spring breeze, without waiting for Fu Jiwen to ask anything, the woman's face immediately changed. She actually turned into a ferocious monster with a ferocious face and wanted to devour Fu Jiwen's essence blood. It was also at this moment that the sound of wind and thunder resounded, and a thunderbolt struck the woman until she disappeared without a trace. Fu Jiwen trembled with fear and didn't dare to stay at the foot of the mountain. He used a technique to escape far away. However, after escaping, Fu Jiwen couldn't forget the woman for a long time. The woman's lovely appearance and elegant manner of speech had always lingered in his mind. Carefully thinking about everything that happened on that moonlit night, Fu Jiwen felt that something was wrong. After all, if the woman had the intention to harm him, why would she wait until the end? Not to mention the time when they first appeared, and not to mention the time when the two of them were entangled, the woman's strength seemed to far surpass Fu Jiwen's. If the woman wanted to devour Fu Jiwen, it would simply be too easy. After thinking for a long time, Fu Jiwen, who couldn't forget the woman, finally returned to the foot of the mountain and carefully searched for traces. Unfortunately, the foot of the mountain was desolate. Other than withered branches and mountain rocks, there were no clues at all. Even the absurdity of that night had long drifted away in the mountain wind. After searching for dozens of days and nights without any results, Fu Jiwen increasingly understood that no result was actually the best result. This meant that the woman was definitely not the mountain spirit she claimed to be, and was definitely not an evil person who wanted to devour the essence blood of others. Therefore, Fu Jiwen looked at the stone wall that the woman flew out from, and then used his magic power to drill through the stone wall. The cave behind the wooden house was what Fu Jiwen had done that day. Unfortunately, even though Fu Jiwen had dug out many passages in the stone wall, he still couldn't find the woman. In the end, Fu Jiwen even wanted to push down the foot of the mountain layer by layer, but when he thought that this might hurt the depressed woman that he hadn't found, Fu Jiwen stopped this crazy idea. Very quickly, a year's time had passed. Fu Jiwen faintly had a connection in his heart. It was as if that day, that moment, the woman in his heart would definitely descend again. He might as well quietly cultivate in the cave and wait for that moment to arrive. Sure enough, on the same day, at the same time, extraordinary splendor reappeared. The woman really did appear. When the woman saw that it was Fu Jiwen again, besides being shocked, her expression changed greatly. Instantly, a vicious look appeared on her face, and she prepared to kill Fu Jiwen. Facing the repulsive face, facing the slender hand that wanted to kill him, Fu Jiwen wore a smile on his face. His eyes were filled with tenderness. He tore open his clothes and presented his bare chest to the woman. The woman was stunned. She actually couldn't do anything. When the woman saw the passage in the stone wall, she cried again. The woman was drunk again. She hugged Fu Jiwen and didn't let go for a long time. The two who hadn't seen each other for more than a year naturally had sex again. After the romance, the woman's attitude changed again. Although she wasn't as vicious as before, she still warned Fu Jiwen not to stay here. She also made it clear to Fu Jiwen that she was a mountain spirit and was different from ordinary humans. She didn't have any sense of shame or etiquette. Fu Jiwen wasn't the first man that she had given herself to. She was just lonely and unbearable, so she easily found Fu Jiwen. -13. Chapter 3692. That night's ending was no different from the first time. After the thunderbolt, the woman disappeared. However, this time Fu Jiwen was careful and used his divine sense to follow her. However, the moment his divine sense was released, it was immediately destroyed by the thunderbolt. Not only did Fu Jiwen not find the woman's whereabouts, but he was also injured. Fu Jiwen was unwilling to admit defeat. He immediately thought hard and used the runes of the Tian Shu in his chest as a guide to seal the areas near the cave and explore one by one. Hard work paid off. After nearly half a year of hard work, Fu Jiwen finally found an area in the depths of the mountain with faint lightning and found the Tian Fa prison crystal inside. Although Fu Jiwen didn't know what this thing was, his intuition told him that this thing was the woman named Yutan. Looking at the lightning that would appear from the void above the heaven punishment prison crystal every once in a while, his heart would ache when the lightning landed inside. He could imagine how his lover would be suffering inside. Sure enough, on the same day in the second year, the Tian Fa prison crystal flashed with dazzling clouds. The binding inscriptions on it broke and turned into strokes. Yutan flew out of the clouds. Worritan looked at Fu Jiwen and then at the Heaven's Punishment prison crystal in front of Fu Jiwen. She sighed slightly and didn't say another unpleasant word. She held Fu Jiwen's hand and looked at the crescent moon in the night sky. She told him how much she missed him in the past year. The two of them made love to each other until 2 hours were up. The inscriptions on the crystal recast and produced a thunderbolt that pulled the woman into it. The woman didn't mention her origin, let alone what the Tian Fa prison crystal was. Fu Jiwen brought the Tian Fa prison crystal back from the foot of the mountain. From then on, he regarded the woman as his wife and told this to his parents. Of course, Fu Jiwen's parents didn't agree. They even threatened to expel Fu Jiwen from the family and exterminate the mountain spirits. However, just as Fairy Jing had guessed, Fu Jiwen's parents didn't ask to see the Tian Fa prison crystal and the so-called mountain spirit, Yutan. Fu Jiwen didn't give in. He took Xiao Rue and the old housekeeper out of the house and made a living alone. In order to help Yutan resist the sky thunder in the void, he went to Zhaixing Lu in the Bronze Pillar Country, met Xiaohua, and obtained the thunder amplification wood. I see. Fairy Jing nodded and said, it seems that this old one has wronged you and Yutan. Your relationship is truly admirable. Unfortunately, you are a cultivator of the mortal world. Your Confucian cultivation base is not high, and you have also mixed Taoist cultivation methods. It is very difficult for you to marry someone from the Immortal Palace. Not to mention that this woman has violated the laws of the Immortal Palace and is a sinner. How can you be with her? Even if you're sneaking around right now, if you're discovered by the law enforcers, you won't be able to keep your lives. I'm afraid that Yutan also knew this. That's why he decided to separate from you. He didn't want you to be implicated. Fairy Jing. Xiaohua was a little bewildered. Didn't you say that the sinners in the heavenly punishment prison crystal are unable to communicate with the outside world? Why can this sorrow cloud come out for 2 hours every year? I can't answer fellow Taoist Zhao's question. Fairy Jing shook her head. I've only heard rumors and don't know the truth. There might be 2 possibilities. Xiaohua nodded and said, the first possibility is that the heavenly punishment prison crystal has been in there for too long. The engraved law chains inside have already lost some of their effectiveness. That's why Miss Yutan can come out for 2 hours every year. Hee, this possibility isn't big, Fairy Jing said with a smile. The engraved law chains are made of the Immortal Palace's most authentic engraved law chains. They can absorb the awe-inspiring qi from the heavenly lightning. No matter how long it has been, it can still bind the sinners. Then it's the second possibility, Xiaohua said with a smile. The engraved law chains of the heavenly punishment prison crystal have been tampered with. Every once in a while, it has to be unlocked for 2 hours to let Miss Yutan come out for a breath of fresh air. And under this possibility, Fairy Jing nodded. Then Miss Yutan's identity is rather interesting. Indeed, Xiaohua looked at Fu Jiwen. That Miss Yutan is most likely a member of the Immortal Palace's inner family. She has committed a great crime. Although there is the punishment of the Immortal Palace, there is still someone who can reach out and block some of it for her. Inner family? Impossible, Fairy Jing said with a smile. How could the Empress bloodline be so carelessly left in the hidden immortal continent? I'm afraid she has some relationship with the inner family, a female official, or a side branch of the Empress. However, judging from this woman's scheming, it's more likely that she's a female official. Scheming? Xiaohua was slightly taken aback. Soon after, he understood a little. Disregarding everything else, This woman had been with Fu Jiwen for so many years without revealing any of her background. It was impossible for an ordinary woman to do that. It doesn't matter who she is. Fu Jiwen didn't care. He smiled and said, "Since this junior believes that she is my wife, this junior will stay with her for a lifetime." "A lifetime? That's your lifetime." Fairy Jing sneered. "Even if you turn into a skeleton, that woman will still live well. Unless you can cultivate to the 9th grade of essence energy. To be able to have such a wife, this junior is already satisfied." Fu Jiwen seemed to have steeled his heart. He turned a deaf ear to Fairy Jing's reminder. "Forget it. Either way, it's your own matter." Xiaohua smiled. "You can decide for yourself." 2 seniors came at the right time. In a dozen or so days, Worry Tan will come out. If 2 seniors are willing, this junior would like to invite seniors to see her. Fu Jiwen thought for a moment and asked with an earnest expression, "Aside from the old housekeeper, no one has seen her yet?" "No need." Fairy Jing refused very simply. "This old one has other matters to attend to with fellow Taoist Xiao." Xiaohua faced Fu Jiwen's earnest gaze and said to Fairy Jing, "Since we're already here, why don't you wait for a few more days?" Fairy Jing didn't know which heartstring had been touched. She shook her head and said, "This concubine doesn't want to get involved in this kind of trouble. Of course, if fellow Taoist Xiao wants to stay, this concubine will go there myself." Fairy Jing got up and walked out of the wooden house. Xiaohua frowned. He felt that Fairy Jing's appearance today was different from before. He nodded to Fu Jiwen and followed her out. Fairy Jing stood in front of the mountain and looked at the golden desert in the distance. She said from the bottom of her heart, "Xiaohua, everything about you is good, except for one thing. Your heart is too soft. Previously, at the Jade Pavilion banquet, I saw that you killed decisively. You were the image of an ambitious and ruthless person. That was why I admired you. But along the way, I discovered that what I saw was far from what I imagined. A person like you, not to mention Sun Kong, even if it was Zhang Daoran, you might not be able to compare. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. If you don't want to go, I won't force you. From today onwards, you and I will go our separate ways and be strangers. Oh, before I leave, I'll give you a word of advice. The Immortal Palace. The reason it's called the Immortal Palace is because it's the representative of Confucian cultivators for millions or even tens of millions of years. It's far from what our declining Taoist sects can compare to." Xiaohua frowned and said with a bitter smile, "Fairy Jing, how long is the journey from where you want to go?" 2 days. Fairy Jing's expression didn't change as she faintly replied, "How about this?" Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "I can't be someone who doesn't keep his word. I'll accompany Fairy Jing to that place first and then come back." "Hee. Actually, since we're already here, whether you go or not, it doesn't matter." Fairy Jing's misty eyes became even more hazy. "Let's go." Xiaohua said to Fu Jiwen in the wooden house and then flew into the air. Fairy Jing didn't say anything. She didn't wait for Fu Jiwen to fly out of the wooden house and flew away. 1 day later, in the depths of the desert, a strange mountain stood out in the dusk. The mountain was oval in shape and split in the middle. There was a dangerous path leading from the yellow sand to the top of the mountain. At this moment, aside from Fairy Jing and Xiaohua who flew to the mountain and stood in the air, there was a man and woman who were struggling to climb the only path. Seeing Fairy Jing stop, Xiaohua was a bit puzzled. The man and woman weren't cultivators, but they were quite agile and had a foundation in climbing. They should be using a light body cultivation technique. Even so, the almost straight-up mountain path was too difficult for the 2 of them. Although the 2 of them did not help each other at the beginning of the climb, when they were halfway up the mountain, the woman was surrounded by danger several times, and the man beside her could not help but lend a helping hand. In the end, when the man was in danger, the woman risked her life to save him. When the 2 of them escaped danger, what surprised Xiaohua was that the 2 of them actually held hands and returned from the middle of the mountain. They didn't forget to climb to the top of the mountain. Fairy Jing also stood in the air and stared at the man and woman. She waited until the 2 of them landed on the ground, then rode 2 horses at the foot of the mountain and left. Only then did she faintly say, "Xiaohua, what do you think this mountain peak looks like?" "A circle." Xiao Hua was stunned. He thought for a moment and replied, 2 semicircles. In fact, this is a heart, a broken heart. As Fairy Jing spoke, the corners of her eyes became moist. Did you see those 2? They were a couple. Although I don't know them, I know that they must have been trapped by love and reached a desperate situation to come to Heartbreak Mountain. The reason why Heartbreak Mountain is in such a remote desert and has such a difficult path is because of the unruffled love water. Anyone who drinks the unruffled love water will forget the person they love the most. There is love in the heavens and love in the world. Although there is unruffled love water in this world, there is no lack of lovers. Heartbreak Mountain was such a desolate place. It was meant to make people think carefully on their way here from the noisy mortal world. Did they need to forget their true love? Did they need to drink a mouthful of water of forgetfulness? The path of Heartbreak Mountain is so difficult to pass. It is also a test to see if people are willing to use life and death to erase the scar in their hearts. The couple just now must have passed the test and couldn't bear to part with each other, so they gave up their earlier impulse and reconciled. -13. Chapter 3693. After she finished talking about the origin of Heartbreak Mountain and the forgotten love water, Fairy Jing held back the tears in her eyes and said with a smile, I have already told you a story before. Now, can you accompany me to the top of Heartbreak Mountain and watch me drink a mouthful of the forgotten love water? Watch as this concubine forgets about that person. See, Xiao Hua had an indescribable feeling in his heart. He stared at Fairy Jing and couldn't figure out whether her words were true or false. He vaguely felt that Fairy Jing had feelings for him, but her story clearly didn't mention him. Xiao Hua really didn't know what Fairy Jing meant by this. As the saying goes, a man can't guess a woman's thoughts. Even someone as strong as Xiao Hua was at a loss when facing Fairy Jing's unfathomable heart. Perhaps, I'm just being paranoid, Xiao Hua thought to himself. Then, he followed Fairy Jing and slowly flew up Heartbreak Mountain. He probed in a low voice, is there really forgotten love water in this world? Can it really erase the love in a person's heart? Of course, Fairy Jing said decisively, don't think that this is a desert where not a drop of water exists. Although the forgotten love water on Heartbreak Mountain is only the size of a fist, it can last for tens of thousands of years. There's an ancient saying, hearts are united on Heartbreak Mountain, but the person on Heartbreak Mountain is heartbroken. It's not a rumor. I've been looking for this place for thousands of years to forget that person. After a while, I drank the forgotten love water. Fellow Taoist Xiao will know when he sees it. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiao Hua suddenly understood. His heart suddenly lightened, but he sighed and said, AI, it's really hard on Fairy Jing. Actually, sometimes, a true love is a rare memory that doesn't necessarily have to be forgotten. Hee. For a male cultivator like fellow Taoist Xiao, it's a beautiful memory. But for female cultivators like me, it might be a disgrace. How can I cultivate when I have to face the unhappiness in my heart every day? The danger of an unstable Dao heart doesn't disappear. I'll tell fellow Taoist Xiao. Fairy Jing smiled sweetly, as if she could really forget that person after drinking the forgotten love water. Forget it, I'll listen to your decision. Xiao Hua knew that for Fairy Jing, forgetting someone was much more realistic than missing someone. This method of severing emotions was the best choice for a cultivator like Fairy Jing. While the two of them were speechless, they had already landed on the peak of Heartbreak Mountain. The mountain peak was not big, only a few hundred feet. There was a deep crack across the mountain peak, which was where the mountain peak had split open. In the center of the crack, there was a stone stool that looked like a wine cup. The stone stool was as tall as a person and was extremely clean. In the center of the stone stool was a heart-shaped groove, and within it, there was a fist-sized spring that flashed with a blood-red color. Are you sure this Wangqing water is not poisonous? Xiao Hua was a bit worried. He looked at the color of the spring water, and then looked at the setting sun that was only left with a smear of blood red at the edge of the desert. At this time, Fairy Jing was really tender. Although she didn't look at Xiao Hua, her face that was looking at the setting sun in the distance revealed a kind of deep longing. She then looked at Xiao Hua as if she would never recognize him again in the future. Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Don't worry. If it's as Fairy Jing said, this Wangqing water can only make you forget the person you love the most. Then after drinking the Wangqing water, you will definitely remember this Xiao." This Xiao, Shu. Fairy Jing stretched out her white hand, placed it in front of Xiao Hua's lips, and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, I still have a very important matter to ask of you." "Oh? Is there any danger?" Xiao Hua's heart trembled. "No." Fairy Jing smiled sadly and said, "There is no danger. I just want to ask fellow Taoist Xiao that after I drink the Wangqing water, fellow Taoist Xiao must not tell the story I told you before. Otherwise, all my previous efforts will be wasted." "Don't worry," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "When did Fairy tell this Xiao a story? This Xiao seems to have never heard of it." If Xiao Hua was joking like this normally, Fairy Jing would have already laughed. But today, Fairy Jing couldn't laugh no matter what. Looking at Xiao Hua's smile, and then looking at the Wangqing water in the shadows, 2 drops of sparkling tears flowed out from the corners of her eyes, falling on both sides of her cherry lips. A salty and moist taste came from her mouth. Fairy Jing's tears were like her heart, salty and bitter. "From now on, there will be no distractions in my heart, no emotions to rely on, no heart to rely on, no soul to return to. What can I do when people are in front of me? There is no shadow in my eyes." A journey on the mountain, a journey on the water. The body walks towards the lonely place. The night is deep and the shadow is invisible. The wind blows, the snow blows, the noise shatters my heart's dream. There is no such sound in this world. Fairy Jing chanted in a low voice. Seeing that the sun was setting and the sky was half red, Fairy Jing's delicate body trembled slightly. She opened her mouth, and a stream of water flew out from the heart-shaped groove and fell into her mouth. Just as the forgotten love water touched Fairy Jing's tear-stained red lips, the forgotten love water condensed in the air. Fairy Jing stared at Xiao Hua and said, "Xiao Hua, thank you." Then, Fairy Jing closed her eyes and the Wangqing water fell into her mouth. After a while, Fairy Jing opened her eyes and looked around strangely. She touched her damp face and looked at Xiao Hua in bewilderment. "You? Who are you? Why do you look so familiar? Where is this?" "Ah?" Xiao Hua opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. He had an unimaginable understanding. It was as if heavenly lightning had fallen on his head. At this moment, he finally understood that the person Fairy Jing was talking about wasn't the person in her story, but the person in front of him. Everything before was hidden from him. Fairy Jing's words in front of Fu Jiwen's log cabin were the same as Yutan's words. This one. Xiao Hua originally wanted to introduce himself, but when he thought of what Fairy Jing said a few moments ago, he held back the indescribable feeling in his heart. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist doesn't need to know who I am. It's already late. Fellow Taoist, it's better for you to return early." "Oh, okay." Fairy Jing smiled and cupped her hands. "Although I don't know who you are, I feel very relieved. This one is called Li Jing, and my Buddhist name is Fairy Jing. I'm in charge of a seaside country in a corner of the hidden, immortal continent. If fellow Taoist comes to the seaside that day, you can come to my country for a chat. Goodbye." With that, Fairy Jing urged her magic power, turned into a rainbow, and flew into the distance. Could it be? Xiao Hua watched as Fairy Jing nimbly left. His heart was truly bewildered. He looked at the already withered groove on the stone block and secretly said, Is this really the unruffled love water? The strange water that can make people and cultivators forget the person they love the most?" Xiao Hua stretched out his hand as if to test it, but just as he touched the ice-cold stone groove, he hurriedly withdrew his hand. His figure turned into the wind and flew toward Fu Jiwen's log cabin. He really didn't dare to touch the Wangqing water. He didn't want to forget the person he loved the most. Poor Fairy Jing. Suddenly, a voice appeared in Xiao Hua's mind. It was the scholarly cultivator Xiao Hua. Even at the last moment, she still refused to say the love in her heart. She still buried it in the deepest part of her heart. Even if she had to bear the burden herself, she didn't want to let someone else be the burden. Actually, fellow Taoist already has a lot of dual cultivation partners. One more fairy jing doesn't matter. One less fairy jing doesn't matter. Why be so pedantic? Let the world have one more person without love? Without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak, the green-robed Xiao Hua sighed. Alas, what do you know? Xiao Hua said helplessly in his heart. It's not that I don't like fairy jing. It's just that I like her. I haven't reached that level of love. You all know about my situation. I already owe others a lot. I don't know if this kind of love will have any results. The less I can, the less I can. Fellow Taoist dares to say that you don't miss her in your heart? Fellow Taoist dares to say that you didn't have any doubts just now? The scholarly cultivator Xiao Hua was somewhat unwilling to let it go. If Fairy Jing had said a few more words, perhaps fellow Taoist would have thrown himself into her arms? Perhaps. Xiao Hua knew that he couldn't hide it from these primordial spirits. He could only admit it. However, I still admire Fairy Jing's decisiveness. She's worthy of being a cultivator in charge of a country. Although her cultivation isn't very high, her way of dealing with people is much better than my indecisiveness. Hee, she's already at the early nascent soul stage. Her cultivation isn't high. The green-robed Xiao Hua mocked. Taoist Zhao's vision is also very high now. Alas, you all can say whatever you want. Perhaps this is fate. Actually, Xiao Hua's heart was also very uncomfortable. It was as if he had lost something for no reason. His heart was empty. Io. Suddenly, the green-robed Xiao Hua exclaimed. Interesting. Fellow Taoist, do you feel like your heart is being twisted by a knife? A bit, but fellow Taoist's words are too exaggerated. Xiao Hua's heart moved. He also felt the green-robed Xiao Hua's surprise. Fellow Taoist, do you have something to say? Good. The green-robed Xiao Hua laughed. Now that someone has delivered himself to your door to let you vent your anger, give I another Taoist robe. Who? Xiao Hua was about to release his divine sense when the green-robed Xiao Hua hastily shouted. Don't. If you release your divine sense, won't Taoist Hua run away? Why is Taoist Hua here? Could it be that he also wants to forget the person he loves the most? The scholarly cultivator Xiao Hua was also very surprised. Xiao Hua was even more puzzled. He asked, Taoist Hua is coming here. I didn't know. How did you know? Hee. Of course it's the result of fellow Taoists stealing. The green-robed Xiao Hua explained. I have been thinking about how to refine Taoist Hua's fire gourd into a sword gourd for the past few days. I still haven't killed the trace of Taoist Hua's primordial spirit in the gourd, so I can sense Taoist Hua's movements within a certain range. At this point, the green-robed Xiao Hua paused for a moment and said again, Fellow Taoist has already ordered I to refine a spirit treasure. I presume you're also thinking about how to refine your life treasure? -13. Chapter 3694. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Looking at the desolate Heartbreak Mountain in the night, he sighed and said, Fairy Jing said it well. On Cast Emotion Mountain, one's heart is united, but on Heartbreak Mountain, one's heart is broken. The night on Heartbreak Mountain is truly desolate. Over there. The green-robed Xiao Hua pointed in a direction. Xiao Hua used the wind evasion technique and flew for a while. Under the guidance of the green-robed Xiao Hua, he used the trace concealing technique to hide. Only then did he use his mind to enter his body. He saw that around the tricolored heaven's heart in his dantian, balls of true energy were constantly surging like flames. They seemed to have some spirituality, but if one looked carefully, they would feel that this spirituality was a bit forced, or rather, it was a bit passive. It wasn't the kind of rare spirituality. Looking outside the 5 brocade cloud painting, the endless amount of righteous qi was much more vast than before. The true energy that Xiao Hua had bitterly cultivated for who knows how many years had already been condensed into true energy by the 5 brocade cloud painting. There was not a trace of impurities in his dantian. Fellow immortal Confucian cultivator, how do you feel? Jade Archive Xiao Hua looked at the scholar's primordial spirit and asked with a smile. The Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the scroll in his hand turned into countless words. These words turned into birds and fishes, or plants. Some of them turned into birds and fishes, and some of them turned into plants, and some of them turned into plants, and they covered the nearby area with green leaves. If fellow immortal had asked me before the year, I might have proudly shown off to fellow immortal, Xiao Hua indifferently replied. After all, fellow immortal has been tempering the true energy in your chest for the longest time. After the seal was broken, I worked hard to catch up. Now, my strength is close to fellow immortals. Of course, according to the realm of Confucian cultivators, my cultivation is not worth mentioning. However, fellow immortal from the Buddhist sect received guidance from Grandmaster Ci Xiong and went into seclusion. His thoughts made me feel a lot. Just as fellow immortal has been pondering, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism have their own strengths. What is the true essence of each sect's cultivation? Perhaps I already know a little bit. Fellow immortal, please speak. Jade Archive, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Taoism's techniques are ever-changing and have the ability to reach the heavens. Whether it was the Confucian cultivators or the Buddhist cultivators, they were far inferior in this aspect. If I simply pursue the ability of Confucianism and cultivate the Tao of primordial spirit, I will follow the prescribed path of refining essence into qi, refining qi into spirit, refining spirit into void, and refining void into heaven. In the end, I will be neglecting the essentials and pursuing the trifles. It is better for me to abandon these appearances and search for the foundation of Confucianism. When Xiao Hua heard this, he clapped his hands and said, "Immortal friend is right. I also feel that great Master Ci Xiong's words are right. If the Buddhist sect's Fozi doesn't properly handle the relationship between the corporeal body and the Sarira, even if he reincarnates for 10,000 years, he still won't be able to reach the peak. If Confucian scholars don't understand the essence of true energy and cultivation, what can they do even if they reach the void refinement and heaven fusion stage? Taoist cultivators are the same. They don't know the foundation of Taoist cultivation. Even if they cultivate to the transcending tribulation stage, I'm afraid they won't be able to achieve anything." Xiao Hua echoed. "That's why we each have our own responsibilities. There's no need to compete with each other. The so-called realm, the so-called means, they are all just appearances. Only by grasping the foundation can we achieve the great Tao." Green-robed Xiao Hua also spoke from his lower dantian. "Good." Xiao Hua clapped his hands and opened his mouth. The Imperial Star Spike and Imperial Shield flew out. He said with a smile, "To be honest, I already don't want to refine these two Imperial tools. This is because the Tao of Imperial tools of Confucianism is far inferior to the Tao of Taoist magic tools. It has already deviated from the foundation of Confucianism. Immortal friend, you should still slowly refine them." Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, "It's currently a chaotic world. You and I can't cultivate peacefully. One more life-saving means is one more opportunity to explore the essence of cultivation." Xiao Hua agreed and sucked the two imperial tools into his mouth. "Green-robed fellow Taoist," Xiao Hua said with a smile, "presumably, you also understand. The so-called life origin magic treasure is to separate a part of the primordial spirit and refine it into the magic treasure. Using one's own primordial spirit to drive the magic treasure is far more convenient than using one's divine sense to drive it. It's like another magic treasure controlled by oneself. This way, although cultivators can't refine spirit tools, with a life origin magic treasure fused with the primordial spirit, it's possible to touch the threshold of spirit tools." "Indeed." Green-robed Xiao Hua nodded. "Moreover, fellow Taoist already knew that your primordial spirit can no longer be split after going through the 3 gold lightning tribulation. Presumably, you've already given up on the idea of refining a life origin magic treasure, right?" "No." Xiao Hua shook his head. "Actually, the origin of a life origin magic treasure, other than the function that I just mentioned, has another function. I know. Among the Taoist magic skills, there is a primordial spirit entrustment technique." Green-robed Xiao Hua had read who knows how many ancient books and secret techniques. He naturally understood very well. A small part of the refining method of this life origin magic treasure was born from this. Yes, the primordial spirit entrustment technique is a great magic skill. It's impossible for ordinary cultivators to successfully cultivate it. Some almighty experts changed this magic skill and taught it to their own disciples, thus obtaining a life origin magic treasure. Xiaohua said with a smile. Similarly, if a cultivator's main body dies, with only the primordial spirit in the life origin magic treasure, it's impossible to achieve the goal of primordial spirit entrustment technique. However, other methods can be thought of, such as possession, to leave a chance of survival. If that's the case, to be honest, I and the others, I'm afraid we're all fellow Taoists' life origin magic treasure. Green-robed Xiaohua said with a sigh. Why is fellow Taoist still entangled with the life origin magic treasure? I don't want to give up on the life origin magic treasure, not because I have to refine it, but because I want to see the mysterious primordial spirit entrustment technique. Xiaohua replied. Unfortunately, the secret technique we obtained is abnormally incomplete. We can't see anything from it at all. Don't think about it. Fellow Taoist already has a spirit tool. In the future, when this spirit tool is complete, it may even be a spiritual treasure. Why bother about the life origin magic treasure? Green-robed Xiaohua said with a smile. Speaking up to here, green-robed Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly said, That's right. If fellow Taoist has nothing to do in the future, don't use the yin and yang dual magic treasure to block disasters. Thinking about Taoist Jingru's cauldron, I feel a bit of heartache. See, so that's how it is, green-robed Xiaohua said, and Xiaohua immediately understood. Although that cauldron isn't much, it contains a trace of Taoist Jingru's primordial spirit. It can be considered half a spirit tool. This spirit tool is not a tool spirit. After the yin and yang dual magic treasure, it will certainly have spirituality. In the future, if there's a coincidence, it can be compared to a heavenly spiritual treasure. How can it be just a heavenly spiritual treasure? Green-robed Xiaohua sneered. It's also possible to advance to the Xiantian realm. Fellow Taoist, you're more prodigal than I. I'm happy, so what? Xiaohua rolled his eyes. Who asked I to be rich? Not only do I have the ocean overturning seal, but I also have the Tongjiao scissors and the Kunlun mirror. Although I don't know where the other half of the Tongjiao scissors is, as long as the Kunlun mirror returns to the Dawn Rain continent and finds the golden core cultivator of the rock border sect, Chang Yefeng, I'll be able to obtain the last fragment of the Kunlun mirror. At that time, the Kunlun ruins will become. Just as he said that, Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. That's right, I seem to have said this before. Why am I repeating it now? It was also at this moment of vigilance that shock appeared on Xiaohua's face as he looked in disbelief. At the same time, green-robed Xiaohua already understood Xiaohua's thoughts. His figure flashed and landed in that place. This was where Xiaohua stored his Qinkuan pouches, storage pouches, and worn-out magic treasures. An extremely ordinary storage pouch was thrown among them. Green-robed Xiaohua didn't use any magic. Instead, he bent down and rummaged through the storage pouches one by one. He looked at the ordinary storage pouch, but didn't open it. He looked up at Xiaohua's strange expression and asked in confusion, Fellow Taoist, isn't this the storage pouch of Tongmu City's Qinyuming? There's a fragment of the Kunlun mirror inside. If there's no accident, it should be in the hands of Chang Yufeng. When fellow Taoist obtained it that day, you knew about it. Why didn't you think of it? Could it be there's something in this space that you and I don't know about? Yes. Xiaohua raised his head and looked meaningfully at Xiaohua of the heavenly Tao above the starry sky. He said word by word, Everything in this world is under the control of the heavenly Tao. Although you and I control this space, you and I aren't the heavenly Tao. It's impossible for us to know everything in this space. Moreover, even if we become immortals, gods, and the so-called heavenly Tao saints, don't forget, there are 50 Daya numbers, 49 Daya numbers, and there's still the evasive one. In this world, there's never anything that can be completely controlled. Rumble. Above the starry sky, a deafening sound was endless. The entire space was shaking. The originally vast space couldn't help but expand again. Damn it, the heavenly Tao. Is there a mistake? This guy clearly forgot. This made-up reason can actually be understood? Green-robed Xiaohua was dumbfounded. He held his forehead and shouted, Ha ha, green-robed fellow Taoist, There's no place without knowledge under the heavenly Tao. You've only cultivated for a short time, so learn slowly. Xiao Hua proudly took Qin Yuming's storage bag, took out the last fragment of the Kunlun mirror, looked at it, and threw it to green-robed Xiao Hua. When you're refining the Kunlun mirror, think about it carefully. How did this Kunlun mirror get from Chang Yefeng to Qin Yuming? Maybe you'll know something. Huh. Green-robed Xiao Hua naturally wasn't convinced. He originally wanted to retort, but his face suddenly revealed a strange expression. He then said with a smile, "All right, this poor Taoist won't talk nonsense with you anymore. Either way, you and I will benefit. At this time, Huada is already here. How about it? Fellow Taoist, you can't let him run away this time, right? Fellow Taoist, you should watch the show from the side. When fellow Taoist makes a move, I will help fellow Taoist to kill this guy." -13. Chapter 3695. Good. Jade Archive. Xiao Hua nodded. This Hua de Zhenren is really hateful. He is especially good at borrowing power and stirring up trouble. At the Jade Pavilion conference, he was lucky to escape by using the Confucian cultivator's formation. This time, we must take his life. With that, Jade Archive Xiao Hua left his body and hid to the side to observe. In the night sky, several figures flew over from the distance. However, these figures did not fly directly. Instead, they flew and stopped. Quite a few times, they even flew in other directions. Under the moonlight, the faces of 8 cultivators appeared. The one in front was Zhai Xingzi, who was wearing an emperor's robe. Next to him was Gusu Chiron, who had changed into a Taoist robe. At this time, Gusu Chiron had a smile in her eyes, unwilling to leave Zhai Xingzi for a moment. Although the two were not flying hand in hand, their hearts were vaguely limitless. Behind Gusu Chiron was the smiling Hua de Zhenren, but he deliberately kept a certain distance from the two and did not disturb them. Behind Taoist Huada were 5 mid-stage, nascent soul cultivators. They all had different appearances and expressions, but all of them had respectful expressions on their faces as they carefully followed behind the 3. Zhai Xingzi accompanied Gusu Chiron to a mountain peak. The two circled around the mountain and met again in the air above the mountain peak. Their faces were full of disappointment as they shook their heads. "What? Isn't this the place that you 2 fellow cultivators are looking for?" Hua de Zhenren flew forward and asked anxiously when he saw this. "Well, fellow Taoist Huada, it's not here." Zhai Xingzi looked at the somewhat oval mountain peak below and sighed. "That mountain peak is cracked? Oh, could it be? Zhai Xingzi is looking for Heartbreak Mountain?" Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. Who was the female cultivator beside Zhai Xingzi? But, within 400 miles of my spiritual sense, there is no such mountain. Fellow Taoist and fairy are mistaken? Hua de Zhenren was somewhat puzzled. "No, it must be nearby." I know." Gusu Chiron thought for a moment and shook her head. "Although I don't know why, I know that as long as I find that place, I will be able to solve my confusion." "That's right. This old man has the same idea." Zhai Xingzi nodded. "Fellow Taoist Huada, fellow Taoists, thank you for your hard work. Let's go take a look over there." Zhai Xingzi raised his hand in the direction of Heartbreak Mountain. "All right." Adept Huada felt somewhat helpless, but he still smiled and said, "As long as fellow Taoist Zhai Xing and fairy Zhai Xing can solve the mystery in your hearts, it's no problem for us to work a little harder." "Humph. You were the one who insisted on following us." Gusu Chiron snorted, as if she was looking down on Hua de Zhenren. "Sure." Zhai Xingzi blurted out, "How can you speak to Taoist Huada like that?" "As expected. How do you know my nickname?" Gusu Chiron's face was filled with surprise and joy. I don't know either." A rare look of embarrassment appeared on Zhai Xingzi's face, but his eyes were the same as Gusu Chiron's, showing surprise. Gusu Chiron shouted, "I knew it. You and I must have known each other in our previous lives. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so coincidental." Ouch! Just as Gusu Chiron was pleasantly surprised, there was a sudden scream. Gusu Chiron's body fell like a rock, straight towards the sharp rock beneath her. "Sure." Zhai Xingzi hurriedly moved his body and immediately landed below Gusu Chiron. He shouted as he was about to catch Gusu Chiron. However, just as he extended his arm, Zhai Xingzi's expression changed slightly. The protective light flashing around his body suddenly disappeared. Like Gusu Chiron, he could no longer stand in the air and fell towards the rock. However, just as he fell, Zhai Xingzi forced himself to change his position so that he was below Gusu Chiron to prevent her from getting hurt. After doing all this, Zhai Xingzi took a deep breath. He wanted to circulate his true origin and fly up again. Unfortunately, the light on the surface of Zhai Xingzi's body flickered a few times like a candle in the wind. In the end, it was extinguished. Bang bang. With two loud sounds, Zhai Xingzi, who was a late nascent soul master, fell powerlessly on the rock. Gusu Chiron landed on Zhai Xingzi's face, knocking his jade crown askew. What is Zhenren? What's going on? Zhai Xingzi raised his hand and picked up Gusu Chiron, who was on top of him. He struggled to stand up and sat on a big rock. He looked at Hua de Zhenren, who was looking at him with a cold smile in the distance, and asked faintly. Gusu Chiron, who was sitting in Zhai Xingzi's arms, lowered her head shyly at first. When she heard Zhai Xingzi's words, she immediately came to her senses. If it weren't for Hua de Zhenren's plot, even if they were in danger, Hua de Zhenren would only need to wave his hand and they would not fall from the sky. Gusu Chiron could not help but rage. Jin Yuda, you dare to plot against me? Gusu Chiron's words were beyond her expectations. She could not believe it was Hua de Zhenren who did this. Fellow Taoist Zhai Xing, don't worry. Hua de Zhenren had a faint smile on his face. He did not fly closer but stood on the side. He waved his hand, and the 5 mid-nascent soul cultivators quickly flew around the mountain and surrounded Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Chiron. Hua de Zhenren then spoke. I just want to ask, who is this fellow Taoist with Confucian cultivation? How does she know the name of I's nascent soul? I don't remember. I don't know this fellow Taoist. Jin Yuda, you. Gusu Chiron's face was a bit pale. She called out a few times but did not know what to say. You're too bold. Fellow Taoist. Hua de Zhenren sneered. I don't even know who you are. How is this bold? Then Hua de Zhenren looked up at the 5 mid-nascent soul cultivators who had surrounded Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Chiron and said, Fellow Taoists, please be the judge. This fellow Taoist appeared out of nowhere and met Zhai Xingzi alone when we returned from the Jadistage meeting. Zhai Xingzi brought her out and did not mention her origin. He only said she was Qiu Xianzi. The strangest thing is that Zhai Xingzi actually sent all the fellow Taoists away, while he brought this strange Qiu Xianzi to a strange place. We have already discussed the rules that we will get after the Yaodai meeting. He has already forgotten about the rare treasures and other things that we will get. If I didn't argue with him, he would have brought the 6 of us here. Otherwise, who knows what Zhai Xingzi is up to? Zhai Xingzi looked coldly at Hua de Zhenren and did not speak. There was no sign of surrender in his eyes. If I didn't bring you fellow Taoists to follow behind them, how would we have discovered that this so-called Qiu Xianzi is not a Taoist cultivator? Perhaps she knows the simple spells of our Taoism, or perhaps she has our Taoism's mental cultivation method, but this old man can see clearly that she is a genuine Confucian cultivator. Hua de Zhenren did not hesitate to reveal Gusu Chiron's background. Since we know that Qiu Xianzi is a Confucian cultivator, then, fellow Taoists, can you think about it more? We just took the pure young ancestor from Jadistage Mountain and Qiu Xianzi appeared. What does this mean? Think about it. What else can it mean? It means that Zhai Xingzi is not the Zhai Xingzi we trusted before. He is in cahoots with Confucian cultivators. And this Qiu Xianzi, if I'm not wrong, she should be someone from Jadistage Mountain's Star-Lord Palace. This so-called pure young ancestor must be Star-Lord Palace's bait. Zhai Xingzi wants to return the treasure we risked our lives for to Star-Lord Palace through Qiu Xianzi. Damn Jin Yuda, you yourself are Kong Hongwu's subordinate Star General. You unexpectedly slander others, falsely accuse the star plucking? The matter involved the star plucking. Gusu Chiron could not help but be furious, cursing. Oh, Qiu Xianzi is truly incredible. How do you know that I am Kong Hongwu's Star General? Hua de Zhenren asked thoughtfully. If you are not from Star-Lord Palace, how do you know? Since you are not from Star-Lord Palace, are you not slandering me? However, Hua de Zhenren only said this. He then said to the 5 middle-stage nascent soul cultivators, You didn't believe me before, not daring to help me kill the lackeys of Confucian cultivators. Do you understand now? Jean Yuta. Gusu Chiron bit her lip, her eyes flashing with anger. You are truly despicable. Of course you know who I am, but how can I not know who you are? Gusu Chiron turned to the nascent soul state cultivator next to her and said, Jin Yuta was a pawn that Star-Lord Palace placed among the Dao cultivators. When I saw you all, the first person I contacted was naturally Zhai Xingzi, but the second was him. You may not have noticed Jin Yuta's expression at that time. It was very interesting. His face was ashen. Why? He was afraid I would expose his true face. Fine, now that things have come to this, I will make it clear to you. I am naturally from Star-Lord Palace, and I have an agreement with Jin Yuta. We can't expose each other's details. However, I really didn't expect that Jin Yuta, a little star general like you, would dare to make a move against me. Are you tired of living? AI, Lady Chiu, I don't know what you are talking about. You can make up all you want, but I've always been upright. How many cultivators on hidden immortal continents say that I'm from Star-Lord Palace? It doesn't matter whether you're there or not. Hua de Zhenren's face was full of sorrow. I believe I am worthy of heaven and earth. I believe I am worthy of my conscience. This is enough. Damn it. Gusu Chiron was obviously not as good as Hua de Zhenren. She cursed and struggled with all her might. Unfortunately, no matter how she urged her true chi, it was useless. Heart-corroding bone? Suddenly, Gusu Chiron understood and exclaimed, You actually got Star-Lord Palace's secret poison from Kong Hongwu? You really deserve to die. -13. Chapter 3696. AI, Shou Xinzi, why don't you honestly admit how you colluded with Zhai Xingzi? Taoist Hua decide again. What's the point of clinging to this old man? To tell the truth, if it wasn't for the 5 fellows seeing the truth, how could this old man allow you dogs to live until today? And this old man's actions are open and above board. This old man absolutely won't be criticized. Using poison is open and above board? Gusu Chiron sneered. Others don't know your face, but how could I not know? Taoist Hua righteously said, Your cultivations are similar to this old man's. This old man admits he is not your opponent, but for the sake of the hidden immortal continent's safety, this old man would rather destroy his own reputation. And I absolutely won't let your scheme succeed. Good, Taoist said it well. A tall and thin cultivator praised. Previously, your servant had some misunderstandings about Taoist. Now, these misunderstandings have been cleared up. In the future, if someone asks about Zhai Xingzi's death, your servant will naturally testify for Taoist. AI, Taoist Huada. Hearing this, Zhai Xingzi said, This old man truly underestimated you. I never expected your scheme to be so deep. Just now, this old man felt your goal was that supreme yang object, pure yang ancestor, but now it seems you still want to take over this old man's forces one by one. Of course, Zhai Xingzi did not know that Taoist Huada's goal was not just these two. The most important thing was that he was unable to kill Xiao Hua at the Jade Pavilion gathering, so he was unable to give an explanation to Kong Hongwu. Now that he saw Star-Lord Hall's Star General Gusu Chiron unexpectedly betrayed Yaodai Mountain, he naturally felt this was an absolutely great opportunity. He only needed to capture Gusu Chiron and send her to Star-Lord Hall, and all his previous mistakes would be forgiven. Furthermore, with Gusu Chiron rebelling and Jing Mushuan dead, would Star-Lord Hall not have even more Star-Lord positions? He was much closer to Star-Lord positions. It would be strange if he did not seize this opportunity. However, this idea, aside from the dead Kong Hongwu and Linghu Pyron who was currently guarding Star-Lord Hall, perhaps Gusu Chiron herself was not clear. This was why she was especially shocked that Taoist Huadia would go back on his word. Taoist Huadia did not take any precautions against him. However, Hua de Zhenren laughed and said, Zhai Xingzi, you secretly colluded with Star-Lord Palace. How many disciples of Dao School have you killed in the Yaodai meeting? Just thinking about it makes my heart ache. Previously, I respected you because you were a pillar of my Dao sect. Now, I will kill you because you are a lackey of the Confucian cultivators. Your so-called goal is nothing more than smoke in this old man's ears. This old man disdains to lower himself to your level. Fellow Taoists, Zhai Xingzi looked at the 5 nascent soul cultivators. His piercing gaze made the 5 of them not dare to look straight at him. Zhai Xingzi said, I won't say much about other things. I admit that Fairy Qiu is a Confucian cultivator. But what I want to tell you is that when we seized the pure young ancestor, the dragon gate that should have appeared didn't appear. At that time, the entire origin formation was about to be destroyed. It was inevitable that we would all die. But at the critical moment, a rainbow bridge appeared. It was this rainbow bridge that allowed us Taoist cultivators of the hidden, immortal continent to escape. This rainbow bridge was released by Fairy Qiu. It can be said that without Fairy Qiu, all the Tao school cultivators who participated in the Yaodai meeting would have been completely wiped out. This kind of kindness. This old man does not ask you to repay it, but you can't turn hostile and bite the hand that feeds you, right? The 5 nascent soul cultivators were obviously stunned. They also participated in the Yaodai meeting and were clear about the danger at the last moment. The appearance of the rainbow bridge was absolutely abrupt. However, they never thought that this sudden and life-saving rainbow bridge was created by Fairy Qiu in front of them. The 5 of them looked at each other with confusion in their eyes. Zhai Xingzi. Hua Dezhenren laughed. You finally revealed yourself, right? Didn't you say that you didn't collude with the Star-Lord Palace? If you didn't collude with Fairy Qiu, how did you know that the rainbow bridge was created by her? This old man saw it. Zhai Xingzi was a little angry, but he still said coldly. Hua Dezhenren also sneered. This old man is strange. My cultivation is not much lower than yours. Why didn't I see it? That day, Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong were also there. Why didn't they see it? Their cultivation is not lower than yours, right? Why didn't they see it? Do you think that your cultivation is higher than all the Taoist cultivators? Zhai Xingzi was speechless. The glance between him and Gusu Qiran was absolutely shocking. How could he explain it to others? How could he let others understand? So, Zhai Xingzi, why do you have to say more? Hua Dezhenren laughed grimly. You're the lackey of the Star-Lord Palace. You're the culprit who caused our Taoist cultivators to suffer losses in the Yaodai meeting. I didn't wrong you by taking your life. Senior Huada, a slightly shorter cultivator, was a little embarrassed and said in a low voice, I think Senior Zhai Xingzi doesn't seem to be a spy of the Star-Lord Palace, and it's a little unfair to determine Senior Zhai Xingzi's life based on this inference. Even if Fairy Qiu is a Confucian cultivator and a member of the Star-Lord Palace, doesn't Senior Zhai Xingzi have a good personal relationship with Kong Hongwu, the Lord of the Star-Lord Palace? This doesn't mean that Senior Zhai Xingzi has wronged us Taoist cultivators. Reverend Mingchen, Hua Dezhenren said with a smile. I know you have some doubts in your heart. Of course, the other 4 fellow cultivators also have doubts. However, I didn't invite you here to fight. I just want you to be witnesses. When someone asks, I can tell the world that I'll end Zhai Xingzi's life today. Reverend Mingchen looked at the 4 people beside him, who all looked a little embarrassed. However, Hua Dezhenren had made it clear. The 5 of them knew that they were no match for Hua Dezhenren, so they could only sigh slightly. Buzz. Hua Dezhenren finished his words. He had achieved his goal. He raised his hand and a magic treasure appeared in the air, making a roaring sound. Jin Yuda, how dare you? Gusu Qiran felt her bones and tendons go numb, but she forced herself to straighten up. She stood in front of Zhai Xingzi and scolded. If you want to kill Zhai Xingzi, you'll have to kill me first. Zhai Xingzi deserves to die. So do you. You don't think I don't dare to kill a Confucian warrior, do you? Hua Dezhenren sneered. Gusu Qiran was not afraid. She stared at Hua Dezhenren and threatened. Jan Yuda, Star-Lord Palace. Is not the Star-Lord Palace, you know. I can tell you clearly that even if I let you Taoist cultivators go, as long as I return to Star-Lord Palace, as long as I reveal my identity, that Kong Hongwu won't dare to blame me. Moreover, I can tell you clearly that even if you dare to touch a hair of Zhai Xingzi, I'll let immortal soldiers and immortal generals chop you into minced meat. Haha, I'm so scared. Seeing Gusu Qiran shouting herself hoarse, What a immortal thought Gusu Chiron was just bluffing and pretending to be scared. He shouted, I can't believe a poisoned Confucian woman dares to threaten me with immortal soldiers and immortal generals. That's right. People who have been poisoned by the heart and bone-corroding poison cannot threaten you. Suddenly, a cold voice sounded in the air. 6 nascent soul cultivators and dozens of gold core disciples of the new country were poisoned to death by you. The state preceptor of the Kujiang country, the state preceptor of the Fu country, and the state preceptor of the Lingqing country were also killed by you. There were also 4 nascent soul cultivators and dozens of gold core cultivators from the Luo Shui country and Jingyu country of Yangzhou. You also shamelessly offered the monarch of the Luo Shui country, Luo Qing, and Jihong Ferry of the Yangzhou country to Jing Mubai of Star-Lord Palace. Jin Yuda, do you think these Taoist cultivators who were poisoned by you can't threaten you? You, who are you? After hearing these words, Hua the Taoist was scared out of his wits. These were his absolute secrets. He thought that he did it without anyone knowing. Outside of Kong Hongwu and Jing Mubao, no one else knew about it. But now, it was suddenly exposed by someone. How could he not be frightened? At the same time, he released his divine sense and frantically scanned the source of the voice. However, just as Hua de Zhenren released his divine sense, the voice sounded from another place. It was cold and terrifying. Who I am is not important. What is important is, what did you do? You are Kong Hongwu's lackey. How dare you sow discord and slander Zhai Xingzi? Although I don't know if Zhai Xingzi is a spy of Star-Lord Palace, looking at you jumping up and down, I know he is being slandered. Go to hell. How could Hua de Zhenren dare to let the voice speak again? He activated the magic treasure in his hand and a flame flew out, rushing towards the source of the voice. However, just as the flame flew out a few feet, Hua de Zhenren's body was overflowing with brilliance. A fist of several feet in size attacked Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Chiron. Moreover, Hua de Zhenren did not wait for the fist to completely hit Zhai Xingzi, who was no longer able to resist. He immediately turned into a rainbow and fled into the distance. Everything was done in a split second. Hua de Zhenren made a prompt decision. Zhai Xingzi roared, Qiu, get out of the way. As he spoke, starlight shone above Zhai Xingzi's head and countless runes surged out. Gusu Chiron's expression changed greatly and she shouted, Zhai Xingzi, don't. Obviously, Gusu Chiron had seen Zhai Xingzi's determination to sacrifice himself to protect her. Hee. Even your natal magic treasure has been taken by me. Why are you still so arrogant? At this critical moment, the entire mountain peak was suddenly enveloped by an incomparably powerful restrictive formation. Xiao Hua's tall and thin figure slowly appeared in the sky. His pair of phoenix eyes flashed with ridicule, and he was still holding a fire gourd in his hand. -13. Chapter 3697. Xiao Hua. Hua de Zhenren felt his whole body sink into a quagmire. Moreover, this restriction was becoming harder and harder. Not only was his body unable to move, but it was also difficult for the world's yuan qi to flow in. When he heard the voice, although he didn't look back, Hua de Zhenren still screamed as if he had seen a ghost. He really didn't expect to meet Xiao Hua here. Taoist Master Xiao? At the same time, 3 of the 5 Yuanying middle-stage cultivators were shocked, as if they had heard of Xiao Hua's name. Xiao Hua was slightly surprised. He glanced at them and didn't pay any attention to them. He smiled at Zhai Xingzi and said, what a good match. If you were to use your secret technique now, then this fairy Qiu's hatred would be endless in the future. Fellow Taoist, Zhai Xingzi's secret technique was naturally blocked by Xiao Hua and couldn't be completed. Now that he heard Xiao Hua's words, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There were many Taoist cultivators in the hidden immortal continent, but who would dare to say such words to Zhai Xingzi? Wang. Hua de Zhenren didn't dare to be negligent. His whole body was covered in flames. Waves of abnormally strong fluctuations were produced from his body. Xiao Hua's restriction immediately began to collapse. Following the loosening of the restriction, a thin crimson crystal thread flew out from Hua de Zhenren's head like an arrow. Immediately after, a violent explosion was produced. A passage of fire was immediately revealed. Hua Dezhenren's body suddenly turned into a rainbow and flew out of Xiao Hua's restriction in a flash. Seeing Hua Dezhenren escape, Xiao Hua wasn't nervous at all. He smiled and said, "Damn it, old man Hua De, look at you. Your life source magic treasure is in my hands. Where can you run to?" While speaking, Xiao Hua waved his hand. A golden light chased after him like a thunderbolt. At the same time, a light pillar also shot out from Xiao Hua's head like lightning. What was special was that between Xiao Hua's curved eyebrows, a layer of dark green brilliance emerged. Hundreds of soul strands, which were invisible to the naked eye, stretched out from the delirium dharma eye and landed on the fire gourd. Sizzle. A series of noises, which sounded like water droplets falling into a pot of oil, was heard. A faint shadow was dragged out from the fire gourd by the soul strands. Looking at the appearance of the shadow, wasn't it Hua Dezhenren? Those who deserve to die will die in the end. No matter how many times you escape, Xiao Hua indifferently said as several hundred soul strands stirred with a schwa schwa sound. Taoist Xiao, save me. Taoist Xiao, save me. Taoist Hua De's primordial spirit screamed crazily, as if he was in extreme pain. Fellow Taoist from the New Nation won't let you go. Fellow Taoist from the Kujiang Nation, the Fu Nation, and the Lingxing Nation won't let you go. The Luo River Nation, Jingyu Nation, and Fairy Jihong also won't let you go. Xiao Hua coldly said. With a twist of his soul thread, Taoist Hua De's primordial spirit immediately turned into a blue dot and scattered in the air. In the distance, Taoist Hua De also screamed in pain as his primordial spirit was destroyed. He held his head with his hands and rolled in the air. How could he still have the strength to escape? In fact, as early as when Xiao Hua obtained Taoist Jingru's natal magic weapon, he could also control it like this. However, Xiao Hua's soul cultivation realm was still low at that time, and his primordial spirit was not as solid as Taoist Jingru's, so he didn't dare to try it. Now, facing Taoist Hua De, it was really easy. The primordial spirit inside the fire gourd was destroyed, and the brilliance of the magic weapon was completely restrained. Xiao Hua turned his hand and threw it to the green-robed Xiao Hua. Moreover, at this time, the dragon-like golden light had already flown to the left of Taoist Hua De. With a wave of the dragon's tail, Kacha sounds were heard. Taoist Hua De's protective armor was immediately cut open. The golden light protecting his body was also cut into two under the golden light. Pooh! Following the destruction of his physical body, a 3-feet-long baby's hands were empty. His pale face carried severe pain, and his eyes were also filled with resentment. Xiao Hua, just you wait. Taoist Hua De's primordial spirit screamed, if I don't take revenge, I'm not a gentleman. Just wait for Star Lord Palace to chase you to the ends of the earth. After saying that, a 3-colored cloud accompanied the golden light flashed, and Taoist Hua De's primordial spirit disappeared in an instant. Pung! The Kunlun mirror's beam of light crossed the sky, paused at the place where Taoist Hua De's primordial spirit stopped, and then shot towards the void several hundred feet away. As the light fell, another miserable cry was heard. The late-stage Taoist Hua De had actually teleported several hundred feet away in the blink of an eye. However, the pitiful Taoist Hua De had really met his nemesis. Even if he had teleported to the void, he was still swept up by the Kunlun mirror's beam of light and was sucked into the broken Kunlun paradise. In the future, perhaps it would be green-robed Xiao Hua's excellent robe again. Seeing the seemingly invincible Taoist Hua De being killed by Xiao Hua in a few rounds, the eyeballs of the 5 middle-stage, nascent soul cultivators almost fell out. Aside from the 3 cultivators who had previously shouted out Xiao Hua's name, the other 2 were pale. They stared blankly at Xiao Hua destroying Taoist Hua De's corpse and keeping the Qinkuan pouch. He turned his head to look at them with a smile. Taoist Hua De, please spare our lives. The 2 cultivators saw Xiao Hua's gaze and suddenly woke up. They hurriedly bowed and said, we were also deceived by Taoist Hua De. Humph. Xiao Hua sneered and looked at the 3 people. These 3 people's appearances were very unfamiliar. Xiao Hua didn't know when he had seen them, so he asked, do you know this old man? Are you not afraid that this Xiao will kill you? Seeing this, the three people looked at each other. One of them hurriedly said, let me tell you, Taoist Xiao, this junior has never seen Taoist Huada before. However, this junior's good friend is Qin Ing. He was saved by Taoist Xiao at the Yaodai gathering. After he left the Yaodai gathering and said goodbye to Sun Kong Shangren, he met this junior. This junior heard him talk about Taoist Zhao's righteousness, especially what Taoist Xiao said. Although I have traveled half a li earlier, I know that I am a disciple of the Tao sect, but I am also a human. The word human is easy to write, but human actions are difficult to do. Don't do small kindness, don't do small evil. This is a human. Without a human, without humanity, where would the Tao foundation come from? Where would the Tao skills come from? Only by being a good person can you be a good cultivator. Can you truly comprehend the Tao of heaven? This really made him have a deep understanding, and also made him admire Taoist Xiao. That's why this junior remembers Taoist Xiao. That's why this junior is not afraid, because this junior did not do anything wrong, and is not afraid of Taoist Xiao coming to find me. Yes, this junior's good friend is Taoist Jian. He also said the same thing. Another cultivator hurriedly said, this junior's good friend is Tsong Yunzi. He followed senior Zhang Daoran. The last cultivator also hurriedly explained, this junior knows that Taoist Xiao will not kill the innocent. Forget it. Xiao Hua waved his hand. These three cultivators all heard of his name. He could be considered to have some reputation in the hidden immortal continent. Although killing Taoist Huade would provoke Star-Lord Palace's anger, but would Star-Lord Palace's anger be limited to this? He also wasn't afraid of this matter being leaked. Of course, Xiao Hua himself also knew that even if these 5 people didn't know him, he couldn't kill them to silence them. You all, make a blood oath. Xiao Hua glanced at Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Churan on the mountain rock and said, if what Taoist Huada said is a lie, then what Zhai Xingzi and this Qiu Xinzi said is true. We can't repay the kindness, but we also can't bite the hand that feeds us. Don't let Star-Lord Palace know about Qiu Xinzi's matter. Good, Taoist Xiao is right. The 5 cultivators knew that this matter was no small matter. No matter how generous Xiao Hua was, he still had to protect his life first. Xiao Hua said Qiu Xinzi, but he might be hinting at Taoist Huada. The 5 cultivators hurriedly made a blood oath to not leak tonight's matter. Then, they very gratefully cupped their hands towards Xiao Hua and turned into rainbows and left. Haha, Zhai Xingzi, we meet again. Xiao Hua smiled and landed on the mountain rock. He tilted his head and looked at Zhai Xingzi, who was holding Gusu Churan. Gusu Churan naturally didn't know that Zhai Xingzi had said bad things to Xiao Hua after leaving Yaodai Mountain. She was very shy in front of Zhai Xingzi, but in front of others, she was very bold. Now that the danger was over, her eyes rolled and looked at Xiao Hua. She didn't care that she was lying in the arms of a male cultivator. Xiao Hua? Taoist Xiao? Gusu Churan asked strangely, you're very powerful. How come I've never heard of your name? It seems, at the Yaodai Mountain gathering, you were also seriously injured. I'm just a nobody. Xiao Hua touched his nose and smiled bitterly. I can't afford to be remembered by a big shot. And I can't afford to be misunderstood by a big shot. TCH, you're still a nobody? Gusu Churan said disdainfully, how can a person who can make Jin Yuda, a late nascent soul cultivator, flee at the first sight of him and easily kill Jin Yuda with just a magic treasure be a nobody? It's just that you hide it so well that others can't see it. Since that's the case, Churan Fairy should quickly forget about me. Xiao Hua said with a smile, but he didn't go forward. Zhai Xingzi didn't expect Xiao Hua to be so narrow-minded. He sighed and said, Taoist Xiao, previously this old man had eyes but failed to see and was deceived by old man Huada. I didn't know that Taoist Xiao was the real chivalrous person and spoke ill of Taoist Xiao. This old man apologizes to this person. Hee, look at what fellow Taoist said. How foreign. You and I are both Taoist cultivators. Even if my bones are broken, my muscles are still connected. How can I put a little misunderstanding in the bottom of my heart? Xiao Hua rubbed his hands and looked embarrassed. But when he looked at Zhai Xingzi again, although he was apologizing, his face was still proud, as if this strength of character was innate. If it weren't for Gusu Chiron in front of him, Zhai Xingzi probably wouldn't even be able to say these soft words. Seeing that Xiao Hua still didn't go forward and still had a smile on his face, Zhai Xingzi suddenly understood and a bitter smile appeared in his eyes. He knew that Xiao Hua was definitely not an otherworldly expert. He immediately said in a loud voice, "Daoist Xiao, this old man can't thank you enough for saving me today. This old man sees that you and old man Huada are both good at fire attacks. This old man obtained the pure young ancestor on Yaodai Mountain, but it's useless in my hands." -13. Chapter 3698. Io, you can't do that. When Xiao Hua heard this, he smiled from ear to ear. He rubbed his hands and said, "This Xiao doesn't even know what the pure young ancestor is, so how would I know that I'm useful? It's not too late to talk about it later, right?" Xiao Hua walked towards Zhai Xingzi. Zhai Xingzi's heart was as clear as a mirror. However, he was reassured by Xiao Hua's attitude. If a person had no greed, then could he still be called a person? Moreover, if Xiao Hua accepted his gift of gratitude, he would definitely do his best to detoxify him. How can that be? Zhai Xingzi smiled. I'm a man of my word. Since I've said it, I can't take it back. If you don't believe me, you can take the jade box out of my Qinkuan bag. All right. Xiao Hua nodded. If you're really useless, then I'll accept it. However, it's not too late to wait until you're able to move. Xiao Hua looked at Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Chiron awkwardly. I only know some basic detoxification techniques. I'm afraid I can't detoxify Star-Lord Palace's secret poison. Since Cho Chiron is from Star-Lord Palace, you must know how to detoxify it? Gusu Chiron was furious. This heart-corroding, bone-corroding poison is controlled by Star-Lord Palace's Palace Lord. How can we have it? Damn, Jean Yuda. I really want to chop you into minced meat. However, Gusu Chiron looked at Zhai Xingzi embarrassedly, afraid that Zhai Xingzi wouldn't like it. Alas, old Huada really did bad things. Fairy Ji Hong was such a good girl, yet she was harmed by him. I didn't think of it. Zhai Xingzi sighs. He glances at Xiao Hua and asks curiously, "That's right, Taoist Master Xiao. Are the things you said true? Even Chio'er doesn't know about these things." Huada Zhenren felt that only he, Jing Muxue, and Shengguan Yiran knew about this evil deed. But he didn't know that everyone would show off. The immortal generals of Star-Lord Palace were also like this. Jing Mushue's drunken show-off fell into the ears of Star Sun Horse Taisher Zhanran. Xiao Hua searched Taisher Zhanran's soul and naturally knew about it. However, Xiao Hua definitely wouldn't say it out loud. He only smiled and said, "This Xiao doesn't know if these are true or not. I just took some cases from several hundred years ago and made up some nonsense. Who would know that it was really done by old Huada? If there's a reason, I'm afraid it's because the Tao of Heaven is clear. Xiao Hua, take the Star Child away and send me back to Star-Lord Palace." Gusu Chiron said, "Kong Hongwu won't dare to make things difficult for me. I'll go find you after I get the antidote." Xiao Hua naturally knew that Star-Lord Hall must be in a mess right now. Kong Hongwu was dead, so where could Gusu Chiron get the antidote? Besides, with Star-Lord Palace's current vigilance, would Gusu Chiron come out after returning? Of course, Xiao Hua had Kong Hongwu's Qinkuan pouch in the space. It might also have the antidote, but Xiao Hua wouldn't take it out unless he had no other choice. "Chio'er, you can't go back." Without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak, Star Child whispered, "You saved my Dao sect cultivators. Even if Kong Hongwu doesn't dare to touch you, what about the others? You'll only be walking into a trap if you go back." But if I don't go back, how can you cure the poison?" Gusu Chiron whispered. "This is the heart-corroding bone, a poison that kills the nascent spirit and nascent soul. So it's like this." Star Child smiled and said to Xiao Hua, "How about this, Taoist Xiao? I'll have to trouble you. Send me and Chio'er back to Star-Lord Palace and say that you captured us, Star Child." Gusu Chiron saw that Star Child was just against her going back. Now that she heard that the poison could harm the nascent spirit, she knew that he was thinking for her safety. She whispered, "Although I don't know why I'm so in love with you, you'd better not go. You'll only die in vain. I'll be happy to accompany you in death." Starchild looked at Gusuchiron with the same expression. Although I don't know why when I see you, I can't take my eyes off you. Alas, it's a pity that we still haven't found the unforgettable place. Gusuchiron sighed. Hee, it's really funny. Xiaohua laughed from the side. It's really a touching scene of a couple in love. But have you all forgotten? How far is this place from Yaodai Mountain? Even if I fly there, can you all last until then? Alas, not bad. Gusuchiron let out a long sigh. Starchild, with our cultivation, the heart-corroding, bone-corroding poison can only last for 3 days. After 3 days, our nascent spirits will start to fester and slowly spread to our bodies. Finally, we'll turn into sewage and even our souls won't be able to escape. It's okay. Starchild didn't seem to be afraid. He looked at Gusuchiron and said, I've lived for 1,000 years and have long been tired of living. Since I met you today, even if I die, so what? It's just that these 3 days are really too short. It's hard to let you and me live freely in this world. Starchild, me too. Gusuchiron also had a sweet smile on her face. Xiaohua was really moved and said with a smile, how about this? Since you only have 3 days to live, I'll take you to the unforgettable place first. Xiaohua, do you know where it is? Gusuchiron's voice trembled with excitement. Xiaohua let out a long sigh and nodded solemnly. It's not just the unforgettable place for you too. It's also the place where the hearts of countless couples in the world have been broken. After speaking, Xiaohua waved his hand and a cloud wrapped around the two of them and flew to Heartbreak Mountain with Xiaohua. While flying, Xiaohua asked about the appearance of the heart-corroding, bone-corroding poison in detail, as well as the symptoms of poisoning. He secretly thought about how to detoxify it. After all, Xiaohua had an ancient secret technique to fight poison with poison, so he could give it a try. Heartbreak Mountain. Yes, this is Heartbreak Mountain. When they arrived at Heartbreak Mountain, the sky was already bright. In the dawn, the mountain that looked like a broken heart was particularly conspicuous in the desert. Gusuchiron saw it and cried out loudly with tears in her eyes. Even Starchild couldn't help but shed tears on his resolute face and dignified tiger eyes. You're right, Qiu-er, this is Heartbreak Mountain. There's forgotten love water on it. You and I weren't fated in a previous life, but in this life, it's just that. You and I were forced to drink forgotten love water, so we don't know each other anymore. It's a pity. Humans are humans because of love. With love, there's each other. There's hidden immortal continent. Naturally, the forgotten love water can temporarily erase the memories of the lovers, but the love in the heart has a seed, so it won't disappear. Time can't destroy this seed. As long as the lovers meet, no matter how far apart they are, no matter how long they've been apart, the seed will break through the ground again and grow into a towering tree. Looking at Starchild and Gusuchiron holding hands and sitting in front of the stone block, Xiaohua couldn't help but sigh. One night ago, at dusk, an infatuated woman had drank the forgotten love water and left. One night later, at dawn, 2 infatuated men and women used love to erase the forgotten love water's effects and came here because of love. Everything in the world was strange and variegated, but this was it. Zhai Xingzi and Gusuchiron hugged each other as they sat down. They appeared very warm and cozy under the sunlight. After a long while, Zhai Xingzi lifted his head and smiled at Xiaohua. Daoist Xiao, thank you for bringing Qiu-er and me here. I am more grateful than if you had saved our lives. I've given you everything in my Chinkoan bag, everything I've learned in my life, and the forces I control. I've also given them all to you. Fellow Taoist has my Tao sect's inheritance in your heart, so you'll definitely treat these cultivators well. I have no more regrets to be able to meet Qiu-er again in this life. Qiu-er and I only have 3 days left to live. We want to quietly spend our last days. No way. Xiaohua was a bit dumbfounded, but looking at Gusuchiron's tranquil smile, he already understood what the two were thinking. At this moment, even if he had the power to overturn the 3 realms, so what? How could it compare to the happiness of being close to the person you love the most? Fellow Taoist Xiao. Gusuchiron also smiled. I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. I'm a sinner of the Immortal Palace. I've been demoted to Star-Lord Palace to confess my crimes. My things are also in my Chinkuan bag. Fellow Taoist can also take them. If you're fated, you can bring them to the Immortal Palace. If not, fellow Taoist can take them yourself. Immortal Palace? Xiao Hua's eyes turned. He had an idea and smiled. Fellow Taoists, your friendship is so deep that it can move heaven and earth. Today, we've finally reunited. I originally shouldn't disturb your last moments of peace. However, if fellow Taoists can help those two couples in the same situation as you two, wouldn't it be more meaningful than waiting for death here? What do you mean by that? Starchild was a bit confused. After all, he and Gusu Chiron were both crippled. How could they help others? Does Fairy Chio know about the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal? Xiao Hua asked. Gusu Chiron was stunned. She turned to look at Starchild. The two exchanged glances and nodded. I know. Thus, Xiao Hua told Gusu Chiron and Starchild about Fujiwen, then looked at the sky and said solemnly, counting with my fingers, in 2 days, that Lady Yuten should come out. If Fairy Chio can help the two of them, even if the two of you can't spend your last days in peace, wouldn't you be able to do great deeds? You should go. Without waiting for Gusu Chiron to speak, Starchild said decisively, such a sentimental little guy. How can we not help? Hee. I'll listen to Starchild's instructions. Gusu Chiron replied sweetly, then said to Xiao Hua, however, I can't guarantee that I can help. After all, the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal needs the Jade Seal inscription of the Immortal Palace to open. I can only give some suggestions or ideas. -13. Chapter 3699. Hearing Qiu Xinzi talk about the Jade Seal inscription, Xiao Hua's heart moved. He said with a smile, well said, Qiu Xinzi, this Xiao has been thinking hard for a long time, but I don't know how to help you two detoxify. This inscription has enlightened this Xiao. If you two don't worry, this Xiao can try to cure it, but this Xiao can't guarantee. Really? Gusu Chiron was overjoyed, but Zhai Xingzi frowned. He looked at Xiao Hua and said, Taoist Xiao, if we don't go to Fujiwen's place, can you help us cure the poison? Xiao Hua looked at Zhai Xingzi and said seriously, Taoist Zhai Xingzi, do you think this Xiao is the same as old Huada? This Xiao just didn't know how to cure the poison. Hearing Qiu Xinzi's words, this heart-corroding, bone-corroding poison was refined by the Immortal Palace. It must be tried from the perspective of a Confucian cultivator. But Gusu Chiron nodded like a chick pecking rice. Yes, but Taoist Xiao knows my Confucian cultivation method? Qiu Xinzi doesn't need to worry about this. Let this Xiao think about it carefully first. Saying this, Xiao Hua waved his hand and pulled the two up from the mountain rock. Auspicious clouds appeared under his feet, and he took the two to Fujiwen's wooden house. A day later, Xiao Hua took Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Chiron to Fujiwen's wooden house. Looking at the small wooden house and the cave on the stone wall, Zhai Xingzi and Gusu Chiron knew that Xiao Hua was telling the truth. When Fujiwen came to greet them, the two's expression was very good. However, Fujiwen was stunned. He knew that Xiao Hua would definitely come back and that Xinzi Jing might not necessarily follow. He didn't expect Xiao Hua to bring two dispirited seniors. However, Fujiwen didn't dare to say anything. He hurriedly tidied up the house and invited the two seniors to sit. Seeing the two of them sit down, Fujiwen brought up some spirit fruits that didn't seem to be anything special. Xiao Hua waved his hand and had Fujiwen leave the wooden house. Afterwards, his face changed into a layer of solemnity, and he said in a deep voice, This Xiao has two pieces of news. One is bad news, the other is good news. I don't know which one the two fellow immortals want to hear first. Good news. Gusu Chiron smiled. But there are still 2 days left. Wouldn't it be better to be a little happier? Zhai Xingzi shook his head and said, Let's hear the bad news first and leave the good news for last. I'll listen to you. Gusu Chiron was clearly a strong woman, but in front of Zhai Xingzi, she was so timid and obedient. Yes. Xiao Hua nodded. The bad news is that after thinking about it for a long time, I still feel that my detoxification skills are too shallow. I'm afraid that I won't be able to cure the two of you. You haven't tried it yet. How do you know it won't work? Gusu Churan immediately shouted, "Why don't you try it on me right now?" "I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid." "Chioer," Zhai Xingzi hurriedly said, "if you want to try, you should try it on me. Why are you snatching it?" "Of course not," Gusu Churan retorted. "In this life, I've let you do whatever you want, but today, you have to listen to me. Since you've been listening for a lifetime, why?" Zhai Xingzi said. Suddenly, his heart moved. Looking at the smile on Xiao Hua's face, he couldn't help but laugh. "Daoist Xiao, then. What's the good news?" At this time, Zhai Xingzi seemed to understand something. Xiao Hua was definitely not the kind of cultivator who was inflexible. Instead, he liked to watch others make a fool of themselves. Cough, cough. Xiao Hua awkwardly touched his nose and said, "Chio is really impatient. Why didn't you wait for this Xiao to finish?" You didn't say it yourself, and you said I was impatient." Gusu Churan, of course, also realized that Xiao Hua was laughing at her. "Ha ha ha." Xiao Hua laughed. With a wave of his hand, he took out a jade bottle and said, "The good news is naturally. This Xiao found the antidote from Old Man Huada's universe bag." "Impossible." Gusu Churan immediately shouted, "Even I don't have this kind of secret medicine. How could Jin Yuda have it?" Xiao Hua shrugged and said very confidently, "This Xiao doesn't know. Anyway, if you don't want to take it, I'll throw it away." With that, Xiao Hua pretended to throw it away. "This old man will try it first." Zhai Xingzi didn't know whether to laugh or cry and hurriedly said, "I'll try it first." Gusu Churan rushed to say. Xiao Hua walked in front of Zhai Xingzi and rolled his eyes at Gusu Churan. "Chioer is a fairy of the immortal palace. Don't you know that men and women shouldn't touch each other? You can watch from the side first." "You." Gusu Churan pouted. Her gray face showed a kind of anger, as if no one other than Zhai Xingzi could make her suffer like this. Xiao Hua opened the jade bottle, and a refreshing sweet fragrance immediately spread out. Xiao Hua pointed his finger, and a drop of milk-like juice fell into Zhai Xingzi's mouth. Gusu Churan had never seen a real heart and bone-corroding antidote before. Her eyes unconsciously widened, and her heart jumped as she stared straight at Zhai Xingzi. After the antidote entered his mouth, Zhai Xingzi immediately closed his eyes. After a while, he opened his eyes. His eyes were dim, and he slightly shook his head. "Impossible?" Xiao Hua scratched his head and looked at the antidote in his hand. "This should be, at this time." Zhai Xingzi's slightly regretful voice sounded. "Alas, it's a pity that this is the antidote. Otherwise, this old man would like to see Daoist Zhao's detoxification technique." "Che!" Xiao Hua flung his hand and threw the jade bottle at Zhai Xingzi, not caring whether Zhai Xingzi could really move or not. Zhai Xingzi rarely teased Xiao Hua. Gusu Churan was just in a good mood. At this time, Xiao Hua immediately threw the jade bottle and hurriedly shouted, "Catch it, Xingzi!" Of course, Zhai Xingzi was very anxious. The antidote was not wrong, but how could it be so effective? Zhai Xingzi's primordial spirit and Yuanying had just recovered. His limbs were still stiff, and it was impossible for him to catch the jade bottle. Seeing the jade bottle fall on his body, Zhai Xingzi was flustered. After catching the jade bottle with great difficulty, his forehead was already covered with sweat. As a late Yuanying master, Zhai Xingzi seemed to have never been in such a difficult situation. However, at this time, Zhai Xingzi did not have any superfluous thoughts. He hurriedly, clumsily took the jade bottle and poured the antidote into Gusu Churan's mouth like an old man of thousands of years. After a drop of antidote entered her mouth, Gusu Churan hurriedly closed her eyes. She opened her eyes in an instant and said with a smile, "Xingzi, Zhenren is right. This is the antidote to the heart and bone erosion. This Jin Yuda really has Kong Hongwu's trust." "That's good." Zhai Xingzi had just opened his mouth when the jade bottle in his hand flew back into Xiao Hua's hand. Xiao Hua's faint voice could be heard. "This kind of poison that can kill without leaving a trace is really a good item to have at home. I have to keep this antidote for myself." Hee. Zhai Xingzi was in a very good mood after surviving a disaster. He took out a small Qinkuan bag from his arms and handed it to Xiao Hua. "There is the pure young ancestor that I got from Yaodai Mountain. There is also the jade eye in the jade box, which is the way to unlock the inscription seal. I haven't had time to see it yet." You can see it yourself? Good. Xiao Hua was not polite. He took the small Qinkuan bag and put it in his arms. Cough, cough. Zhai Xingzi coughed twice and said, Jinren Xiao, there are also some jade slips in the small Qinkuan bag. They are the secret books of my Dao cultivator lineage. Please return them to me. Oh, is that so? Xiao Hua put his hand into his bosom and was about to take out the small Qinkuan bag. However, after taking out half of the Qinkuan bag, he stopped there. Xiao Hua tilted his head and asked curiously, What is the secret book of your lineage about? This. Zhai Xingzi looked at the small Qinkuan bag and hesitated for a moment before saying, When I was young, I obtained some secret techniques about the power of stars. Oh, no wonder. I understand now. Xiao Hua's eyes lit up and he said with a smile, No wonder you call yourself Zhai Xingzi. When I heard the name Zhai Xingzi, I couldn't help but think of Zhai Xinglu. I thought you were the shopkeeper of Zhai Xinglu. Oh, do you know Zhai Xinglu? Could it be that I didn't recognize the mountain? I've heard of Zhai Xinglu. However, I don't have any relationship with Zhai Xinglu. It's just that my name is a little coincidental. Zhai Xingzi was now somewhat regretting that he had impulsively given the small Qinkuan bag to Xiao Hua. However, it was still all right. The small Qinkuan bag was right in front of Zhai Xingzi's eyes. He reckoned that Xiao Hua wouldn't be able to do anything to it. Xiao Hua nodded and took out the small Qinkuan bag from his bosom. However, he stopped as if he had thought of something again. He didn't return the small Qinkuan bag to Zhai Xingzi. Instead, he blinked his eyes and asked, Then has Zhai Xingzi been to Zhai Xinglu before? I once saw a map of the stars in Zhai Xinglu and was deeply moved by it. Cough, cough. Zhai Xingzi coughed again. He shook his head and said, I've never been to Zhai Xinglu before. If I have time in the future, I'll go back and take a look. Taoist Master Xiao, please take the jade box away and return the Qinkuan bag to me. Oh, all right. Xiao Hua opened the small Qinkuan bag with a smile. He took a look and said with a smile, Fellow Zhai Xingzi, you have a lot of private collections. Hee, it's nothing much. It's just some junk. Zhai Xingzi smiled as he watched Xiao Hua take out the jade box. Xiao Hua suddenly asked, That's right. Fellow Zhai Xingzi, why didn't you open it and take a look? Zhai Xingzi was startled. He smiled and said, Didn't I say earlier that I wasn't interested in the pure young ancestor? What I wanted was the Azure Abyss Dragon Saliva. However, that item was taken away by Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong, so I could only take this item. As for the other treasures on Yaodai Mountain, I wasn't interested in them. Therefore, I never opened them. At this point, Zhai Xingzi hesitated for a moment and said, Actually, I have a secret technique that I haven't been able to make any progress in. It requires the help of a treasure with the power of the stars and moon. Therefore, I wanted to use this item to exchange for a treasure with the power of the stars and moon. However, before I could say anything, I was framed by Huada. -13.